The wagon driver didn't want to take her all the way. Black Hollow ain't no place for a woman like you, he said, tobacco juice staining the snow beside his boot. Especially not in February. You sure about this? Evelyn Mercer pulled her threadbare coat tighter and nodded. She had 2 carpet bags, $17 sewn into her sleeve, and bruises on her ribs that were only 3 days old. She was sure about nothing except that going back meant dying slowly, and going forward might kill her fast. She'd take fast. I'm expected, she said quietly. The driver snorted. Expected by Rowan Hayes, I reckon. Well, good luck with that, lady. Man's half wild. Lives so far out past the ridge, even the wolves don't bother him much anymore. Evelyn said nothing. She'd heard worse about the men back home. The wagon jolted over frozen ruts as they climbed higher into the mountains. Wyoming spread out below them like a punishment. Endless white, jagged peaks, wind that cut through wool like it was cheesecloth. Everything here looked like it wanted you dead. She liked that in a strange way. At least the land was honest about it. Back in Philadelphia, her Uncle Silas had smiled while he hit her. He'd worn a Sunday suit to her parents' funeral and called her poor dear while his fingers tightened on her inheritance papers. He'd poured tea for the lawyer and whiskey for himself and told her she'd marry Edmund Carver by spring or he'd see her committed to an asylum for her own protection. Edmund Carver was 53, owned a shipping company, and had buried 2 wives already. Evelyn had seen the way he looked at her during church, like she was a debt he intended to collect. So one night in January, while Silas was drunk and snoring, Evelyn took the household cash, her mother's wedding ring, and a newspaper she'd hidden under her mattress. She'd circled one advertisement in pencil 3 weeks earlier, working up the nerve. Rancher seeking wife. Must be strong, honest, and unafraid of hard work. No drunkards or gossips. Write to Rowan Hayes, Black Hollow, Wyoming Territory. She wrote the letter by candlelight, lied about almost everything, said she was capable, resilient, excited for frontier life. Didn't mention that she'd never been further west than Harrisburg, or that she flinched every time a door slammed. His reply came in 4 sentences. Miss Mercer, I need someone who can survive a Wyoming winter and won't run at the first hardship. If that's you, wire me your arrival date. I'll be there. R. Hayes. Not exactly poetry, but he hadn't asked about her family or her dowry or whether she was pretty. That was something. The wagon crested a final ridge and Black Hollow appeared below, a collection of wooden buildings scattered along a frozen creek like someone had thrown dice and left them where they landed. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. A church steeple leaned slightly left, like it was tired. The whole town looked temporary, like a strong wind might erase it overnight. There's the mercantiles, the driver said, pointing. Hayes said he'd meet you there if he was in town. If not, you'll have to wait. How long? The driver shrugged. Could be an hour, could be 3 days. Weather turns, nobody moves, you'll figure it out. He stopped the wagon in front of a weathered building with a painted sign, Fletcher's Dry Goods and Supply. A few people on the street stopped to stare. A woman in a heavy shawl whispered something to the man beside her. They both looked at Evelyn like she was a curiosity. A kitten someone had dressed in doll clothes. Evelyn climbed down carefully. Her legs were numb from the cold in the ride. She tried not to wobble. The driver tossed her bags into the snow. Good luck, lady. You're going to need it. He didn't wait for a reply. The wagon rolled back up the road, and Evelyn stood alone in the middle of Black Hollow, Wyoming, with no money for a return ticket and no idea what Rowan Hayes even looked like. A man stepped out of the mercantile, old and wiry, with a beard that looked like it had never seen a comb. He studied her openly. You the mail-order bride? Evelyn's face burned, but she nodded. Rowan's out at the north pasture. Should be back by sundown if the weather holds. You can wait inside. Martha's got coffee on. Thank you. She picked up her bags and followed him into the store. It was warmer inside, but not by much. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with flour, sugar, bolts of fabric, tools, ammunition. A woman stood behind the counter. Martha, presumably, with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. So you're the one, Martha said flatly. I'm Evelyn Mercer. I know who you are. Rowan wired ahead, said you were coming from Philadelphia. She said Philadelphia like it was a disease. Long way to travel for a man you never met. Yes, ma'am. You know what you're getting into? Evelyn hesitated. I know it's hard out here, Martha snorted. Hard? That's cute. You ever gutted a deer, dug a grave in frozen ground, delivered a breech calf at 2 a.m? No, ma'am. Then you don't know anything. Martha poured coffee into a tin cup and pushed it across the counter. Rowan Hayes is a decent man, better than most out here. But decent don't mean easy, and it sure don't mean safe. His ranch is 14 miles from town, and that road's impassable half the year. You get snowed in, you're stuck. Something goes wrong, nobody's coming to help. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the cup. The heat hurt her fingers. I'll manage. Will you? Martha leaned forward. Because we get women like you every few years. Pretty city girls who think they're going to tame the frontier and live some romantic adventure. They last maybe 6 months before they're begging for stage fare back east. And the men they leave behind, well, that's a different kind of damage. Evelyn met her eyes. I'm not here for romance, Mrs. Fletcher, and I'm not leaving. Something shifted in Martha's expression. Not approval exactly, but maybe a fraction less contempt. We'll see, she said. Evelyn sat on a wooden bench near the stove and sipped the coffee. It was bitter and scalding, but it was warm. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. People hurried past the windows, pulling their coats tight. An hour passed, then 2. Evelyn watched the door. She thought about Silas, probably just now discovering she was gone. He'd be furious. He'd check the trains first, then the coach lines. Eventually, he'd find the postmaster who remembered a young woman mailing letters west, and then she pushed the thought away. Silas didn't know where Black Hollow was. Even if he did, he wouldn't follow her all the way to Wyoming. It was too far, too expensive. She repeated that to herself like a prayer. The door opened and cold air rushed in. A man stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat crusted with snow. He pulled off his hat, and Evelyn saw dark hair, a hard jaw, eyes that looked gray in the dim light. Maybe 30 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell. The frontier aged people fast. He looked around the store, and his gaze landed on Evelyn. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked over slowly, like he didn't want to spook her. Evelyn Mercer? His voice was low, rougher than she'd expected. Yes, Mr. Hayes. He nodded once. Call me Rowan. You ready to go? She stood up, legs still shaky. Now? It's snowing. It's always snowing. We leave now. We'll make it before dark. We wait. We'll be stuck here till morning. His eyes flicked over her. Not unkind, but assessing. You hurt? The question startled her. No, why? You're standing like someone who's been hurt. Evelyn's breath caught. She forced herself to straighten, ignoring the ache in her ribs. I'm fine. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. I've got the wagon outside, 2 horses, good strong team. It's rough going, but they know the way. I don't have much, Evelyn said, gesturing to her bags. That's all right. Neither do I. Martha was watching from behind the counter, her expression unreadable. You taking her out tonight, Rowan? Storm's coming in heavy. I know, Rowan said. We'll beat it. Your funeral. Rowan picked up Evelyn's bags like they weighed nothing and headed for the door. Evelyn followed, pulling her coat tight. Outside, the wind hit her like a fist. Snow swirled in every direction, and the temperature had dropped brutally. The wagon was waiting, a sturdy, rough-built thing with 2 massive horses stamping their hooves impatiently. Rowan loaded her bags into the back and offered his hand to help her up. His grip was strong, calloused, warm despite the cold. Evelyn climbed onto the bench, and Rowan settled beside her, taking the reins. He didn't say anything as he urged the horses forward. The wagon lurched into motion, and Black Hollow disappeared behind them into the white. For a long time, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the crunch of snow under the wheels, the wind howling across the open land. Evelyn tried to see where they were going, but the snow was too thick. Everything was white and gray and freezing. She snuck a glance at Rowan. His face was hard, weathered, unreadable. He looked like a man who didn't waste words. She wondered what he thought of her, this city woman who probably looked half frozen and completely out of place. You warm enough? He asked suddenly. Yes, Evelyn lied. He reached behind the bench and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, handing it to her without looking away from the road. Use that. It's going to get colder. She wrapped it around herself, grateful. Thank you. He nodded. More silence. Finally, Evelyn couldn't stand it anymore. Why did you want a wife? Rowan didn't answer right away. He guided the horses around a bend, then said, Needed help. Ranch is too much for one person. Hired hands come and go, but they don't care the way an owner does. So you want a business partner? Something like that? And if it doesn't work? He glanced at her then, just briefly. Then we'll figure it out. I'm not going to force you into anything, Evelyn. You want to leave? You leave. But I won't make it easy, and I won't make it fast. You'll have to earn your way back. It should have sounded threatening. Somehow, it didn't. I don't want to leave, Evelyn said quietly. Good. Because out here, wanting to quit and actually quitting are two very different things. The wagon climbed higher into the mountains. The road, if you could call it that, was barely visible under the snow. Evelyn had no idea how Rowan knew where he was going. It all looked the same to her. But the horses seemed confident, and Rowan's hands were steady on the reins. After another hour, the snow began to ease slightly, and Evelyn saw shapes emerging from the white. Fence posts, a gate, the outline of a large barn. Then a house appeared, low and solid, built from logs and stone. Smoke rose from the chimney. This is it, Rowan said. It wasn't much, but it looked strong, built to last. Rowan stopped the wagon near the barn and climbed down. Evelyn followed, her legs stiff and aching. He grabbed her bags and nodded toward the house. Go inside, get warm. I'll tend the horses and be in shortly. I can help? Not tonight. Go. It wasn't mean, just firm. Evelyn didn't argue. She walked to the house, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped inside. The interior was simple. One large room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, a table, 2 chairs. A doorway led to what looked like a bedroom. Everything was clean, functional, bare. No decoration, no softness. But it was warm, and it was quiet. Evelyn set her bags down and stood there, breathing. She'd done it. She'd escaped Silas. She'd made it all the way to Wyoming. She was standing in the house of a man she didn't know, married to him in name only, with no way back and no idea what came next. And for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. Not yet, anyway. The door opened and Rowan came in, stomping snow off his boots. He hung his coat on a peg and moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the flames. There's stew on the stove, he said. Not fancy, but it's hot. Help yourself. Evelyn ladled stew into a bowl and sat at the table. It was thick, savory, better than she expected. She ate slowly, watching Rowan move around the room. He poured himself coffee, checked the door latch, adjusted the damper on the stove. Finally, he sat across from her. I know this isn't what you expected, he said. Evelyn looked up. What do you mean? This. He gestured around the room. Me. All of it. You probably thought, I don't know, something different. I didn't think anything, Evelyn said honestly. I just needed to leave. Rowan studied her for a long moment. Who hurt you? Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. What? You're scared. Not of me, not yet, but of something. Someone. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I've seen it before. Women who run west aren't usually running toward something. They're running away. Evelyn set the spoon down carefully. Does it matter? No, Rowan said. Not to me. But if someone's coming after you, I need to know. She thought about lying. But what was the point? My uncle, she said quietly. He was my guardian after my parents died. He wasn't kind, and he wanted me to marry a man I didn't want to marry, so I left. Will he follow you? I don't know. Maybe. Rowan nodded slowly. If he does, he'll have to go through me. It should have sounded like bravado, but the way he said it, flat, factual, made it sound like a simple statement of reality. I don't want to bring trouble to you, Evelyn said. Trouble's already here. Always is. One more kind doesn't make much difference. Rowan stood and picked up his coffee. Bedroom's through there. It's yours. I'll sleep out here tonight. You don't have to. I do. You need space, time. I'm not going to rush you into anything. He looked at her directly. We're married on paper, Evelyn, but that's all it is right now. Paper. Everything else, we'll figure out as we go. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Men didn't talk like this. Men took what they wanted. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan nodded and turned toward the fire. Evelyn carried her bags into the bedroom and closed the door. The room was small but clean. A bed with thick quilts, a washstand, a trunk. A single window looked out onto the dark mountains. She sat on the bed and finally let herself breathe. She'd made it. She was here. She was safe. For now. Outside, the wind howled and the snow kept falling. Wyoming stretched endlessly in every direction, cold and brutal and unforgiving. But inside this small house, with a fire burning and a man who'd promised she wouldn't have to be afraid, Evelyn Mercer let herself believe, just for one night, that maybe she'd made the right choice, even if she had no idea what morning would bring. Dunce. The first week was the hardest. Not because Rowan was cruel. He wasn't. Not because the work was impossible, though it was brutal, but because Evelyn had spent so long being afraid that she didn't know how to stop. Every time Rowan moved too quickly, she flinched. Every time he raised his voice to call the horses, her heart jumped. Every time a door slammed in the wind, she was back in Philadelphia, waiting for Silas's footsteps in the hall. Rowan noticed. He didn't comment, but he noticed. He started moving slower around her, speaking quieter, giving her space. It should have made her feel weak. Instead, it made her feel seen. The ranch itself was bigger than she'd expected. Several hundred acres of grazing land, a barn that housed 6 horses and a few milk cows, pens for chickens, storage sheds for hay and equipment. Rowan ran about 80 head of cattle, and he did most of the work himself. Used to have a hired hand, he explained one morning while showing her around. But he left last fall. Said the isolation was driving him crazy. Most men can't handle it out here. And you can? I prefer it. Evelyn believed him. Rowan wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't warm either. He was self-contained, solitary, comfortable with silence. She got the sense he'd built this ranch as much to escape people as to build something. She wondered what he was running from. But she didn't ask. People with secrets recognized other people with secrets. Rowan started teaching her the basics. How to milk the cows without getting kicked. How to collect eggs without spooking the hens. How to recognize when a horse was favoring a leg. How to read the sky for weather changes. She was terrible at all of it. The cows kicked her. The hens pecked her hands. She couldn't lift the water buckets without stopping 3 times. The cold made her clumsy, and her city clothes were completely inadequate. But she kept trying. One morning, she slipped on ice while carrying a bucket of milk and went down hard. The bucket flew, milk sprayed everywhere, and she landed on her back in the freezing mud. Rowan was there in seconds, pulling her up. You hurt? No, Evelyn gasped, humiliated. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're freezing and bruised, and you just lost half a day's milk. Tears pricked her eyes. I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'll... Stop, Rowan said firmly. He gripped her shoulders, not hard, just steady. You're learning. That's all anyone can do. You think I didn't fall 100 times when I first got here? You think I didn't mess up constantly? But you're... I'm what? Stronger? Maybe. But I wasn't born out here, Evelyn. I came west same as you, running from something I didn't want to talk about. And I learned the hard way, same as everyone else. She stared at him, surprised. Give yourself time, Rowan said quietly. You've been here a week. You're still standing. That's more than some people manage. He let go of her shoulders and picked up the empty bucket. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. That night, Rowan brought out a pair of heavy canvas work pants, a thick wool shirt, and sturdy boots. These were mine when I was younger, he said. They'll be big, but they're better than what you've got. Wear them tomorrow. Evelyn took the clothes, throat tight. Thank you. He nodded and went back to the fire. She wore them the next day. They were big, shapeless, and completely unflattering. She'd never worn pants in her life, but they were warm, and she didn't fall. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn started to find her footing. She learned to move with the rhythms of the ranch, wake before dawn, feed the animals, collect eggs, milk the cows, haul water, mend fences, chop wood, cook, clean. collapse into bed exhausted. It was hard, harder than anything she'd ever done, but it was hers. Every blister, every sore muscle, every small success, it belonged to her, not to Silas, not to anyone else. And slowly, the fear started to ease. Rowan was nothing like Silas. He didn't yell when she made mistakes. He didn't punish her for being slow. He didn't expect perfection. He just expected effort, and Evelyn had plenty of that. One evening, after a long day mending fence posts, they sat by the fire eating dinner. Rowan looked at her across the table. "You did good today," he said. Evelyn blinked, startled. "I only fixed 3 posts." "3 more than yesterday. That's progress." It was such a small thing, but it hit her hard. The simplicity of it, the lack of criticism, the quiet acknowledgement that she was trying. "Thank you," she said softly. Rowan nodded and went back to his food. But something shifted between them that night. Not romance, not yet, but a fragile kind of trust. The first real storm hit in late February. Evelyn woke to a sound like the world ending. Wind screaming against the house, snow battering the windows, the whole structure groaning under the assault. She stumbled out of the bedroom, heart pounding. Rowan was already up, fully dressed, checking the doors and windows. "What's happening?" she shouted over the noise. "Blizzard," he said grimly. "Big one. We need to check the barn. Make sure the animals are secure." "Now?" "Now." He handed her a coat, a scarf, gloves. "Stay close to me. Don't let go of the rope." "What rope?" Rowan opened the door, and a wall of white roared inside. He grabbed a thick rope that was tied to the door frame and handed her the other end. "This. If we get separated in the whiteout, follow the rope back. Understand?" Evelyn nodded, terrified. They stepped outside and the storm swallowed them whole. Evelyn couldn't see 3 feet in front of her. The wind knocked her sideways and the cold burned her lungs. She gripped the rope like her life depended on it. Because it did. Rowan moved ahead of her, solid and sure, cutting a path through the chaos. She followed, every step a fight. When they reached the barn, Rowan hauled the door open and pulled her inside. The storm's roar muted slightly, and Evelyn sagged against the wall, gasping. The animals were restless, horses stamping, cows lowing nervously. Rowan moved through them quickly, checking each one, calming them with a steady voice. Evelyn helped where she could, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. When they were done, Rowan looked at her. "You all right?" "I think so." "Good. Now we go back, same way. Don't let go." They fought their way back to the house, and when they finally stumbled inside, Rowan slammed the door shut and latched it. Snow covered both of them head to toe. Evelyn collapsed onto a chair, shaking. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "Sometimes worse," Rowan said, pulling off his gloves. "We'll be stuck inside for a few days, maybe a week. Hope you don't mind my company." Evelyn looked at him, snow-covered, exhausted, but steady, unshaken. "I don't mind," she said, and she meant it. The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days trapped inside with nothing to do but wait. No way to check the animals. No way to get to town. Just the two of them, the fire, and the endless howl of wind. At first it was awkward. They didn't know how to be around each other without work to fill the silence. But slowly, they started talking. Rowan told her about growing up in Montana, about his father's ranch, about coming to Wyoming to build something of his own. He didn't talk about why he left, and Evelyn didn't push. She told him about Philadelphia, about her parents, about how much she'd loved books and music before everything fell apart. She didn't talk about Silas in detail, but Rowan understood anyway. "You're safe here," he said one night, staring into the fire. "I meant what I said. No one's going to hurt you in my house." Evelyn believed him. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The wind died. The snow stopped. And when they opened the door, the world was buried under 6 feet of white. Rowan grabbed a shovel. "Time to dig out." They worked together, clearing paths, checking the animals, hauling supplies. It took all day, and by the time they finished, Evelyn was exhausted. But she was still standing. That night, as they sat by the fire, Rowan looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Evelyn smiled, a real smile, maybe the first one since arriving. "So are you," she said. And for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Evelyn thought maybe she could actually do this. Maybe she could survive out here. Maybe she could build a life. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally stop running. But deep in the back of her mind, a whisper remained. Silas is still out there, and men like Silas don't let go. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, and when it finally arrived, it brought more problems than solutions. The snow melted fast, turning the roads into rivers of mud. The creek behind the ranch swelled until it jumped its banks, flooding the lower pasture. 2 calves were born premature and didn't make it through the night, and the fence line on the eastern boundary collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice, letting nearly 20 head of cattle wander onto neighboring land. Rowan found out about the fence when a rider showed up at dawn, a lean, hard-eyed man named Calhoun who worked for Gerald Pritchard, the rancher whose property bordered theirs to the east. Evelyn was in the kitchen when she heard voices outside. She looked through the window and saw Rowan talking to the stranger, their body language tense. She dried her hands and stepped onto the porch. "Don't care how the fence broke," Calhoun was saying. "Your cattle are on Pritchard land, eating Pritchard grass. That's theft." "It's not theft if it's an accident," Rowan said evenly. "I'll get them back today." "You'd better. And you'd better fix that fence before any more of your animals wander over. Mr. Pritchard's been patient with you, Hayes, but his patience has limits. Tell Pritchard I'll handle it." Calhoun's eyes flicked to Evelyn, dismissive and cold. "This the mail-order wife everyone's talking about?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's my business." "Sure it is." Calhoun smirked. "Just surprised you'd bring a woman all the way from Philadelphia to live in the middle of nowhere. Most women don't last 6 months out here before they run screaming back to civilization." "Most women aren't married to me," Rowan said quietly. "Now if you're done delivering Pritchard's message, you can leave." Calhoun tipped his hat mockingly. "Good luck with the fence, Hayes. And with her." He rode off, and Rowan stood there for a moment, hands clenched. Evelyn walked down the steps. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Rowan said shortly. "Gerald Pritchard owns the biggest ranch in the territory. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. Thinks my land should be his." "And the fence?" "Storm damage. I'll have to round up the cattle and fix it before he decides to take matters into his own hands." Rowan looked at her. "You ever herded cattle?" "No." "You're about to learn." They saddled the horses, and Rowan handed Evelyn a coiled rope. "You probably won't need this, but keep it on the saddle just in case. Stay behind me and to the left. When we find the cattle, we'll push them back toward our land slowly. Don't rush them. Spooked cattle are dangerous." Evelyn nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. She'd gotten better at riding over the past weeks, but herding cattle was something else entirely. They rode east through muddy trails until they reached Pritchard's land. The cattle weren't hard to find. They were grazing peacefully in a wide meadow, completely unconcerned about whose property they were on. Rowan positioned himself behind the herd and gestured for Evelyn to take the left flank. Slowly, they began moving the animals back toward the broken fence line. It went smoothly at first. The cattle ambled along, bored and cooperative. But then one of the older steers decided it didn't want to move and broke away from the group, heading deeper into Pritchard's land. "Stay with the herd," Rowan shouted. "I'll get him." He spurred his horse forward, chasing the runaway steer. Evelyn tried to keep the rest of the cattle moving, but without Rowan guiding them from behind, they started to scatter. Panic flared in her chest. She didn't know what to do. The animals were splitting in 3 different directions, and she couldn't be everywhere at once. "Come on," she muttered, urging her horse toward the largest group. "Come on, stay together." A shout echoed across the field. Evelyn turned and saw riders approaching from the west. 3 men, moving fast. Her heart sank. Pritchard's men. The lead rider pulled up beside her, a burly man with a thick beard and a suspicious scowl. "What the hell are you doing on this land?" "Getting our cattle back," Evelyn said, trying to sound confident. "The fence broke. We're fixing it today." "Fixing it don't change the fact that your animal's been eating our grass for 2 days. That's going to cost Hayes." "We'll pay for the grazing," Evelyn said quickly. "Just let us get the cattle back across the line." The man laughed. "You'll pay? With what? Everyone knows Hayes is barely keeping that ranch afloat. He can't even afford hired hands anymore. Had to order himself a wife instead." The other men snickered. Evelyn's face burned, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We'll pay. Now, if you'll excuse me..." One of the riders cut in front of her horse, blocking her path. "You don't tell us what to do, lady. This is Pritchard land. You're trespassing. We're retrieving our property. Your property's been trespassing for 2 days. Far as we're concerned, that makes it our property now." Evelyn's pulse hammered. "That's not how it works." "Out here it works however Mr. Pritchard says it works." Rowan appeared suddenly, riding hard, the runaway steer trotting reluctantly ahead of him. His eyes swept the scene. Evelyn surrounded, the cattle scattered, Pritchard's men blocking her. "There a problem here?" Rowan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. The bearded man turned his horse to face him. "Problem is, your cattle been eating our grass, Hayes. Mr. Pritchard wants compensation." "Fine. I'll settle with Pritchard directly. Now move aside and let my wife pass. Maybe we should hold on to the cattle as collateral, just till you pay up." "That's not happening." The tension thickened. Evelyn could see Rowan calculating, weighing options. 3 men against 1. Bad odds. But then Rowan did something unexpected. He smiled, cold and humorless. "You really want to explain to Pritchard why you started a fight over 20 head of cattle?" he said quietly. "Because if you put hands on me or my wife, that's what this becomes. A fight. And I promise you, it won't end the way you think." The bearded man hesitated. Rowan pressed forward. "Take the message back to Pritchard. Tell him I'll pay for the grazing once I sell the spring calves. He knows I'm good for it. But if he wants to push this into something bigger, I'm happy to oblige." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the bearded man spat into the mud and yanked his horse around. "Fine. But you got 1 week, Hayes. After that, Pritchard comes collecting himself." The riders left, and Evelyn exhaled shakily. Rowan rode over to her. "You all right?" "I think so." "Good. Let's get these cattle home." They spent the rest of the day rounding up the scattered animals and driving them back across the property line. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, and both of them were exhausted and filthy. That night, over a quiet dinner, Evelyn finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why does Pritchard want your land so badly?" Rowan pushed food around his plate. "Because it's between his ranch and the river. If he controls my land, he controls the water rights. Out here, water means everything. Without it, ranching's impossible. So he's trying to squeeze you out. He's been trying for years, buying up small ranchers, undercutting prices, making life difficult. Most people sell eventually. They get tired of fighting. But you won't." Rowan looked at her. "This land is mine. I built it. I'm not handing it over to a man like Pritchard just because he wants it. Even if it's dangerous?" "Especially if it's dangerous." Evelyn set down her fork. "I didn't come here to make your life harder, Rowan. If Pritchard's using me as another excuse to—" "Oh." "Stop," Rowan said firmly. "Pritchard was a problem long before you got here. This isn't your fault." "But if you hadn't what? Married me? Then I'd still be out here alone, fighting the same fights. At least now I've got someone who can hold a rifle and isn't afraid of a little mud." Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. "I'm terrified of mud." Could have fooled me. The tension eased slightly, but Evelyn could still feel the weight of it, the danger creeping closer, the sense that something was about to break. She just didn't know what, or when. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of a letter. Rowan had ridden into town for supplies, and Evelyn was alone at the ranch, mending a torn saddle blanket on the porch. The afternoon was warm, the first real warmth they'd felt since winter, and the mountains looked almost peaceful under the clear sky. Then she heard a horse approaching. Evelyn stood, shading her eyes. A rider was coming up the trail. Not Rowan. Someone else. Her stomach twisted. The rider pulled up near the house, and Evelyn recognized him, the old man from the mercantile, Fletcher. "Mrs. Hayes," Fletcher said, tipping his hat. "Your husband asked me to bring this out. Letter came for you on the mail coach." A letter. For her. Evelyn's mouth went dry. "From where?" "Philadelphia postmark." No, 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 no. She took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she knew too well. Silas. Fletcher watched her carefully. "You all right, ma'am?" "Fine," Evelyn managed. "Thank you for bringing it." "Rowan should be back by evening. You need anything before then?" "No, I'm fine." Fletcher didn't look convinced, but he nodded and rode off. Evelyn stood on the porch, staring at the envelope. She didn't want to open it. She wanted to throw it in the fire and pretend it didn't exist, but she couldn't. With trembling fingers, she tore it open and unfolded the single page inside. The words were short, brutal, precise. Evelyn, you thought you could run from your obligations. You were wrong. I know where you are. I know who you married, and I'm coming to bring you home where you belong. If you cooperate, this will be simple. If you resist, it will be unpleasant for everyone involved. I'll see you soon. Silas. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the ground. He knew. He'd found her, and he was coming. Evelyn's legs gave out and she sank onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking. All the safety she'd felt, all the progress she'd made, it shattered in an instant. Silas was coming, and when he got here, he'd take her back. He'd destroy everything, unless she left first. The thought hit her like a punch. She could leave. Right now, pack a bag, take one of the horses, ride to the nearest town, and disappear before Silas ever reached Black Hollow. It would be easy. Rowan wouldn't stop her. He'd said she could leave whenever she wanted. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't do it. Because leaving meant Silas won. It meant running forever. It meant abandoning the first place she'd ever felt like she could breathe. And it meant leaving Rowan to deal with the consequences alone. She picked up the letter and read it again, forcing herself to think past the panic. Silas was coming. That was a fact. But he wasn't here yet. That gave her time. Time to tell Rowan. Time to prepare. Time to figure out what the hell she was going to do. When Rowan returned that evening, he knew immediately something was wrong. Evelyn was sitting at the table, the letter in front of her, her face pale and drawn. "What happened?" he asked, setting down the supply sacks. She handed him the letter without a word. Rowan read it slowly, his expression darkening with every line. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at her. "When did this come?" "This afternoon." "And you didn't leave?" Evelyn blinked. "What?" "You could have run, taken a horse, left before I got back. But you didn't." She stopped, unsure how to explain. "I thought about it." "But you stayed." "Yes." Rowan nodded slowly. "Good. Because we're not letting him take you." "Rowan, you don't understand. Silas is—" "I don't care who he is," Rowan said flatly. "He's not taking you anywhere. You're my wife. This is your home. And if he wants to change that, he's going to have to go through me." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He'll bring lawyers, legal papers. He'll say I'm not in my right mind, that I need to be under his guardianship. Then we'll get our own lawyer. Martha's brother practices law in Cheyenne. He's helped ranchers fight land disputes before. He'll know what to do. And if that doesn't work," Rowan's jaw set, "then we'll handle it another way." Evelyn stared at him. "You can't fight the law, Rowan." "No. But I can fight a man who thinks he owns you." He leaned forward. "Listen to me, Evelyn. I don't know what your life was like back in Philadelphia. I don't know what he did to you. But I know what I see now. A woman who's worked harder than most men I've met. A woman who's earned her place here. And I'll be damned if I let some East Coast snake drag you back into a cage." Tears stung her eyes. "Why? Why do you care?" Rowan looked at her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to run from something. And I know what it's like to finally find a place worth defending." He reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he'd really touched her since that day in the storm. "We'll fight this," he said quietly. "Together." Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. For the first time since the letter arrived, she let herself believe they might actually have a chance. But deep down, she knew Silas. And men like Silas didn't lose, not without taking something with them when they fell. The next week passed in a haze of preparation and dread. Rowan rode into town and sent a wire to Martha's brother in Cheyenne, explaining the situation. The reply came back within 2 days. "We'll help. Send details. Arrive in 1 week." It was something, but a week felt like both too long and not long enough. In the meantime, life on the ranch continued. Cattle still needed tending. Fences still needed mending. The work didn't stop just because danger was coming. But everything felt different now. Evelyn caught herself watching the trail constantly, jumping at every distant sound. Rowan started keeping his rifle closer, loaded and ready. They didn't talk much about it. There wasn't much to say. But at night, instead of retreating to separate spaces, They sat together by the fire, not touching, not speaking, just present. Two people bracing for a storm they couldn't avoid. On the fifth day, Martha Fletcher showed up at the ranch. Evelyn saw her coming from the window and felt a spike of anxiety. Martha hadn't visited since the day Evelyn arrived in Black Hollow. Her showing up now couldn't be good. Rowan stepped out onto the porch to meet her. Evelyn followed, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha dismounted and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Town's talking," she said bluntly. "About what?" Rowan asked. "About Evelyn. About some man asking questions at the telegraph office in Rawlins. Older man, well-dressed, city accent. Said he was looking for his niece who'd run off with a stranger." Evelyn's blood turned cold. "When?" Rowan demanded. 3 days ago. Word just reached Black Hollow this morning." Martha looked at Evelyn. "That your uncle?" "Yes." Martha nodded grimly. "Then you need to know he's not just looking, he's laying groundwork. Told the telegraph operator his niece was mentally fragile, that she'd been manipulated into leaving Philadelphia. Said he had legal documents proving guardianship." "That's a lie," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "I'm 23 years old. I don't need a guardian." "Doesn't matter if it's a lie," Martha said. "What matters is whether people believe it. And a well-dressed man with legal papers? People tend to believe men like that." Rowan's expression was stone. "What's he planning?" "Can't say for sure, but if he's smart, and it sounds like he is, he'll come to Black Hollow with a sheriff or a marshal. Make it official. Make it hard for you to refuse." "And if we do refuse?" Martha met his eyes. "Then it gets ugly." Silence fell over the porch. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I won't let him take me back." Martha studied her for a long moment. "You sure about that? Because once this starts, there's no going back. You'll be fighting your own family in front of the whole town. People will judge you. They'll whisper. Some will take his side just because he's blood." "I don't care." "You say that now." "I mean it," Evelyn said firmly. "I'd rather die out here than go back to Philadelphia." Martha's expression softened slightly. Just a fraction, but it was there. "All right then. If you're serious, you need to start building your case. Get witnesses who can testify you're of sound mind. Get documentation of your marriage. Make sure everything's legal and airtight." "My brother's already on it," Rowan said. "Good. You're also going to need community support. Right now, half the town thinks you're a charity case who'll run home the first time things get hard. You need to change that perception." "How?" Evelyn asked. "By showing up. By being visible. By proving you belong here." Martha's gaze sharpened. "There's a town meeting tomorrow night. Ranchers get together once a month to discuss water rights, grazing boundaries, supply needs. Women usually don't attend, but there's no rule against it. You should come." Evelyn glanced at Rowan, uncertain. He nodded. "We'll be there." Martha climbed back on her horse. "One more thing. Pritchard's been talking too, saying Hayes is overextended, saying the ranch is failing. If your uncle offers Pritchard money to back his claim, Pritchard might take it, just to make your life harder." "Of course he would," Rowan muttered. "Watch yourself," Martha said. "Both of you. This is about to get complicated." She rode off, and Evelyn sagged against the porch railing. "She's right," she said quietly. "This is going to destroy everything." "No," Rowan said. "We're not letting it." But even he didn't sound entirely convinced. The next evening, they rode into Black Hollow together. The town meeting was held in the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting flickering light over rows of rough wooden benches. Ranchers and their families filed in, talking in low voices, eyeing Rowan and Evelyn with open curiosity. Evelyn kept her head high, even though her stomach was churning. She'd worn her cleanest dress, braided her hair neatly, tried to look respectable, but she still felt like an outsider. They took seats near the back. A few people nodded at Rowan in acknowledgement. No one spoke to Evelyn. The meeting started with the usual business: discussion of grazing boundaries, complaints about cattle rustlers, arguments over water access. Evelyn tried to pay attention, but her mind kept drifting. Then Gerald Pritchard stood up. He was a tall, broad man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from money and power. He looked every inch the successful rancher. "I'd like to raise a concern," Pritchard said smoothly, "about the Hayes Ranch." The room went quiet. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. I've got cattle reports showing Hayes' herd is underweight, Pritchard continued. His fences are in poor repair, his land's being mismanaged. Now, I've got no personal issue with Rowan Hayes, but when one ranch's problems start affecting the rest of us, when his cattle wander onto our land, when his fences fail and create gaps in the boundary lines, that becomes everyone's problem. Murmurs rippled through the room. I'm proposing, Pritchard said, that we conduct an inspection of the Hayes property. Make sure it's being run according to standard practices. And if it's not, he shrugged, then maybe it's time to consider whether Hayes should sell to someone who can manage it properly. Evelyn felt Rowan tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stood up. Every head in the room turned to look at her. May I speak? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. This is a rancher's meeting, ma'am. I'm a rancher's wife. That makes it my business, too. Silence. Then someone in the front row chuckled. Let her talk. This ought to be entertaining. Pritchard gestured dismissively. Fine, go ahead. Evelyn stepped into the aisle, her hands clenched at her sides. Mr. Pritchard is right about one thing. Our fences did fail. The winter storm damaged them, but we've spent the last 2 weeks repairing every inch of line on the property. The cattle that wandered onto Pritchard land have been returned, and we've already arranged to pay for the grazing. And the underweight cattle? Pritchard challenged. The herd's underweight because we lost 2 calves in the spring and had to redistribute resources to keep the rest alive. That's called triage, Mr. Pritchard. It's not mismanagement, it's survival. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn pressed on. You're right that one ranch's problems can affect everyone. But trying to force someone off their land because they had a hard winter, that affects everyone too. Because if it can happen to us, it can happen to any of you. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. I'm new here. I know that. And I know some of you think I won't last. Maybe you're right. But my husband has been working this land for 7 years. He's earned his place here. And if you let Pritchard push him out just because it's convenient, you're setting a precedent that none of you can afford. She sat down, heart pounding. The room was completely silent. Then an older rancher near the front spoke up. She's got a point. Pritchard's been buying up land left and right. We let him take Hayes' place. What's to stop him from coming after the rest of us? I'm offering fair market value, Pritchard said defensively. Fair according to who? Someone else called out. The meeting devolved into argument, but the energy had shifted. People were questioning Pritchard now, not Rowan. When the meeting finally ended, Rowan and Evelyn walked out into the cold night air. That was stupid, Rowan said quietly. Evelyn's heart sank. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. That was stupid, Rowan repeated, and brave, and exactly what needed to happen. He looked at her, and something in his expression had changed. Thank you. Evelyn nodded, throat tight. They rode home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of strangers. The silence of 2 people who'd just fought their first battle together and realized they made a pretty good team. But the war was far from over, and the worst was still coming. Silas arrived in Black Hollow 6 days later, and he didn't come alone. Evelyn was at the ranch when Martha rode up fast, her horse lathered and breathing hard. She didn't dismount, just pulled up short and called out from the saddle. He's here, your uncle. Came in on the morning stage with 2 men and a federal marshal. Evelyn's stomach dropped. A marshal? Claims he's got legal documents proving you're unfit to make your own decisions. Says the marriage isn't valid because you weren't of sound mind when you entered into it. Martha's face was grim. They're at the hotel now, but they'll be coming out here, probably by tomorrow. Rowan appeared from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. How much time do we have? A day. Maybe less if Silas pushes it. Martha finally dismounted, her expression tight. My brother hasn't arrived yet from Cheyenne. You're going into this without legal representation. Then we stall, Rowan said. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not handing her over without a fight. Martha looked between them. Listen to me carefully. A federal marshal means this is official. If you resist, they can arrest you both. Evelyn for abandoning her legal guardian, you for harboring her. Is that what you want? What I want, Rowan said quietly, is for people to stop treating my wife like she's someone's property. The law doesn't care what you want. The law cares about documentation and jurisdiction, and I know what the law cares about, Rowan interrupted. I also know that out here the law moves slow, and a lot can happen while it's moving. Martha shook her head. You're talking about doing something stupid. I'm talking about protecting what's mine. She's not a piece of land, Rowan. I know that. But she chose to be here, and I'm not letting anyone take that choice away from her. Evelyn had been silent through the exchange, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. Now she spoke, her voice steadier than she felt. What do you need me to do? Rowan looked at her. Can you shoot? You know I can. I mean really shoot, not target practice, not tin cans. If someone's coming at you, can you pull the trigger? Evelyn thought about Silas, about the bruises, about the years of fear and control and suffocation, about the life she'd finally started building here, fragile and difficult and hers. Yes, she said. Martha looked horrified. You can't be serious. You're talking about shooting a federal marshal? I'm talking about worst case, Rowan said. If it comes to that, which it won't, we need to be ready. This is insane. This is Wyoming. It's a little bit insane by definition. Martha stared at him for a long moment, then turned to her horse. I tried to warn you, both of you. When this goes sideways, don't say I didn't try. She rode off, and Evelyn and Rowan stood in the yard, the weight of what was coming pressing down on them like a physical thing. Do you really think it'll come to that? Evelyn asked quietly. To shooting? No, Rowan said. But I've learned that hoping for the best and preparing for the worst keeps you alive longer. And if they arrest us? Then we'll deal with it, together. That night they didn't sleep much. Rowan checked the rifles, made sure the ammunition was accessible, reinforced the door latches. Evelyn packed a bag with essentials, money, documents, her mother's ring. Just in case. Just in case of what, she didn't let herself think too hard about. They sat by the fire, not talking, just listening to the wind and the distant sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. Why are you doing this? Rowan looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. Doing what? Fighting for me. You barely know me. We've been married a few months, and most of that time we've been strangers living in the same house. You could just let them take me. It would solve a lot of your problems. Rowan set the rifle aside carefully. You think that's what I should do? I think it would be easier. Easier isn't always right. That's not an answer. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When I came out here 7 years ago, I was running from something too. A life I didn't want, a future I couldn't stomach. I thought if I got far enough away, if I built something with my own hands, I could outrun the feeling that I didn't have control over anything. He looked at her. And then you showed up, scared, bruised, desperate. And I saw myself in you, not the details, but the core of it. That need to choose something for yourself, even if the choice is hard. So you're helping me because you feel sorry for me? No, I'm helping you because you haven't given up. You could have run a dozen times by now. You could have let Silas's letter break you. You could have hidden when Pritchard came after us at the town meeting. But you didn't. You stood up and you fought back. His voice softened. That's not weakness, Evelyn. That's strength. And I don't abandon people who are strong enough to fight for themselves. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'm not as strong as you think. Yes, you are. You just don't see it yet. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was more than the scared girl who'd stepped off that wagon in February. But belief was hard when the man who'd terrorized her for years was less than 15 miles away, armed with legal papers and federal authority. I'm afraid, she whispered. I know. What if we lose? Then we lose. But at least we went down fighting. It wasn't comforting, exactly, but it was honest. And somehow, that was enough. They came the next afternoon, just as the sun started its descent behind the mountains. Evelyn saw them from the window, 4 riders approaching up the trail. She recognized Silas immediately, even at a distance, the way he sat his horse, straight and rigid, the way he rode like he owned the world. Rowan, she said, her voice tight. He was beside her instantly, looking out, his jaw set. Stay inside. Let me talk to them first. No. Evelyn, no, she said firmly. If I hide, it makes me look guilty. Like I have something to be ashamed of. I'm going out there. Then stay behind me. They walked out onto the porch together. The riders pulled up in the yard and Silas dismounted slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on Evelyn. He looked exactly the same. Graying hair, expensive suit, cold eyes that saw people as obstacles or tools. Behind him stood two men who looked like hired muscle, and a federal marshal in a worn badge and weathered coat. "Evelyn," Silas said, his voice smooth as oil, "you've led us on quite a chase." "I'm not going back with you," Evelyn said. Silas smiled, that terrible, patient smile she remembered too well. "I'm afraid that's not your decision to make, dear. You're unwell. You've been manipulated by this man into an illegal marriage, but don't worry, I'm here to take you home and get you the help you need." "I don't need help. I need you to leave." The marshal stepped forward, holding up a sheaf of papers. "Ma'am, I'm Marshal Greer. I have documents here signed by a Philadelphia magistrate stating that Silas Mercer is your legal guardian due to concerns about your mental fitness. He's within his rights to take you back into his custody." "I'm 23 years old," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but clear. "I don't need a guardian." The magistrate disagrees. "According to testimony provided by Mr. Mercer and corroborated by witnesses, you've shown signs of instability and poor judgment. The marriage to Mr. Hayes was entered into without proper counsel or family notification, which suggests I wanted to get away from him," Evelyn interrupted, pointing at Silas. "He beat me. He stole my inheritance. He tried to force me into a marriage I didn't want, so I left. That's not insanity, Marshal. That's survival." Silas's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "She's delusional. You can see it yourself. Making wild accusations, inventing stories. They're not stories," Evelyn said. "I have the bruises to prove it." Bruises from frontier life, perhaps. From a husband who doesn't know his own strength. Silas looked at Rowan with barely concealed contempt. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, how much did you pay for her? What was the arrangement? A cook and a bed warmer, in exchange for a roof over her head?" Rowan took a step forward, and Evelyn grabbed his arm. She could feel the violence coiled in him, ready to strike. "Don't," she whispered. "That's what he wants." Marshal Greer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, I understand this is difficult, but the law is clear. If Miss Mercer—" "Mrs. Hayes," Rowan corrected coldly. "If Mrs. Hayes is determined to be under legal guardianship, then her marriage is invalid. You'll need to surrender her into Mr. Mercer's custody while the matter is sorted out in court." "And how long will that take?" Rowan asked. "Could be weeks, could be months." Months she'd spend back in Philadelphia, under his control. Greer shifted uncomfortably. "That's not my decision to make, sir. I'm just here to enforce the court order." "The court order's from Philadelphia. We're in Wyoming. Federal jurisdiction supersedes territorial law." "Not out here, it doesn't." The two hired men moved their hands closer to their guns. The marshal noticed and raised a hand. "Let's all stay calm. Nobody needs to get hurt." "Then maybe you should turn around and leave," Rowan said. Silas laughed, sharp and mean. "You think you can threaten a federal marshal and get away with it? You're even stupider than I thought. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm telling you that my wife isn't leaving this property. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me." "Gladly," one of the hired men muttered. The marshal looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes, I don't want this to escalate, but if you're refusing to comply with a federal order, I'll have no choice but to arrest you." "Then arrest me." "Rowan," Evelyn said desperately, "don't." "I mean it, Marshal. You want to take her, you arrest me first. You put me in chains and haul me to wherever you're planning to take her. But I'm not stepping aside." Greer looked at Silas, clearly hoping the older man would back down. But Silas's face was carved from stone. "Do your job, Marshal," Silas said coldly. "Arrest him if you have to, but I'm not leaving without her." The marshal reached for his belt, hand moving toward the iron shackles hanging there. And then a voice called out from the trail. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Everyone turned. A man on horseback was approaching. Tall, lean, wearing a lawyer's suit under a traveling coat. He rode up calmly and dismounted, pulling a leather case from his saddlebag. "Thomas Fletcher," he said, nodding to Rowan. "Sorry I'm late. That blizzard in the pass slowed me down. Martha's brother, the lawyer from Cheyenne." Relief flooded through Evelyn so fast she almost staggered. Thomas looked at the marshal. Marshal Greer, I presume. I'm here representing Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, and before you make any arrests or enforce any orders, I think you should take a look at these. He pulled documents from the case and handed them to the marshal. Greer unfolded them, scanning quickly. His frown deepened. What am I looking at? Marriage certificate, properly filed with the territorial government. Witnessed affidavits from 3 residents of Black Hollow attesting to Mrs. Hayes's sound mind and good character, and a letter from the territorial governor's office stating that any guardianship orders from outside jurisdictions must be reviewed by a Wyoming court before enforcement. That's bureaucratic nonsense, Silas snapped. That's the law, Thomas said mildly. You want to challenge Mrs. Hayes's marriage or her mental fitness? You're welcome to do so. But you'll do it in a Wyoming court, in front of a Wyoming judge, following Wyoming procedures. The marshal looked between Thomas and Silas, clearly caught in the middle. How long will that take? Silas demanded. Months, probably, maybe longer. Courts out here move at their own pace. Thomas smiled pleasantly. Of course, you're welcome to stay in Black Hollow while you wait. I'm sure the hotel has rooms available. Silas's face darkened with fury. This is obstruction of justice. This is due process. There's a difference. The marshal folded the documents and handed them back to Thomas. He's right, Mr. Mercer. I can't enforce an out-of-territory guardianship order without local court approval. You'll have to file a petition. That's ridiculous. That's the law. Silas looked at Evelyn, and for the first time she saw something other than cold control in his eyes. She saw rage, pure, burning rage. You think this is over? He said softly. You think hiding behind some frontier lawyer and your backwoods husband will save you? I will drag you through every court in this territory. I will destroy your reputation. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you are, a thief and a liar who ran away with money that doesn't belong to her. The inheritance was my mother's, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. She left it to me, not to you. Your mother was my sister, and when she died, that money became mine to manage on your behalf. Manage, not steal. Silas took a step toward the porch, and both Rowan and Thomas moved to block him. That's close enough, Rowan said quietly. For a moment, Evelyn thought Silas might actually try to push past them. His hands were clenched into fists, his face twisted with fury. But he wasn't stupid. He knew he was outnumbered now, knew he'd lost this round. Fine, Silas said, his voice like ice. We'll do this the legal way. But when I win, and I will win, you'll wish you'd come with me quietly. He turned to the marshal. Let's go. We're wasting time here. The 4 men mounted their horses and rode back down the trail. Nobody spoke until they were out of sight. Then Evelyn's legs gave out. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground, holding her steady while her whole body shook with delayed terror and relief. It's all right, he murmured. They're gone. For now, Thomas said grimly. But he meant what he said. He's going to fight this. Rowan helped Evelyn to the porch steps and sat beside her. What are our chances? Honestly, better than I expected. The marriage is legal, the witnesses are solid, and Wyoming courts tend to favor local residents over out-of-territory claims. But Silas has money and connections. He can drag this out for a long time. How long? 6 months. Maybe a year. Evelyn closed her eyes. A year of this. A year of waiting for the next attack, the next legal maneuver, the next attempt to drag her back. Can you fight it? Rowan asked. I can try, but it's going to cost money. Court fees, filing fees, travel expenses every time we have to appear in front of a judge. Thomas looked apologetic. I'll keep my rates as low as I can, but this won't be cheap. We'll manage, Rowan said. Rowan, you can't afford... Evelyn started. I said we'll manage. Thomas nodded slowly. All right, I'll file a formal response to Silas's petition as soon as I get back to Cheyenne. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. Any interactions with Silas, any threats, any attempts to contact Evelyn without proper legal channels. It'll all help. He packed up his case and mounted his horse. One more thing, be careful. Men like Silas don't take losing well. If he can't win legally, he might try other methods. Like what? Evelyn asked. Like anything that makes you look unstable or incompetent? Like setting fires or sabotaging your ranch and blaming it on your poor management? Like spreading rumors or bribing witnesses? Thomas's expression was grave. I've seen desperate men do desperate things. Don't give him any ammunition. He rode off, and Evelyn and Rowan sat on the porch in silence. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. It should have been beautiful, but all Evelyn could see was the darkness creeping in. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For putting your ranch at risk. For—" "Stop," Rowan said firmly. He turned to face her. "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this. And I'd choose it again." "Why?" "Because you're worth fighting for." The words hit her like a physical blow. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen someone worth defending. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to fight someone like Silas. He always wins. He didn't win today. But he will eventually. He's got money and lawyers, and we've got stubbornness and a good legal case and a whole lot of Wyoming between him and what he wants." Rowan's hand found hers. "He's not invincible, Evelyn. He just wants you to think he is." She wanted to believe that, but belief was hard when you'd spent years learning that resistance was pointless. They went inside as darkness fell, and Evelyn tried to focus on normal things: dinner, cleaning, banking the fire. But her hands kept shaking, and her mind kept replaying Silas's face, his voice, his threats. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. A soft knock came at the door. "Evelyn?" Rowan's voice quiet. "You all right?" "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "I'm trying to sleep." "Want company?" "Not like that," he added quickly. "Just company. Sitting in the same room. Sometimes that helps." She hesitated, then said, "Okay." The door opened and Rowan came in with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat in the chair by the window, keeping a respectful distance. For a while they didn't talk, just sat there in the dim light, drinking coffee, existing in the same space. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "What did you run from? When you came west?" Rowan was quiet for a long time. She thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My father wanted me to take over the family business, lumber mill in Montana. Good money, stable work, everything a man could want. But you didn't want it. I hated it. The smell, the noise, the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't. My father was a hard man, not cruel, just immovable. He had a plan for my life, and any deviation from that plan was failure." Rowan stared out the window. "I stuck it out for 5 years after my mother died. Tried to be the son he wanted. But every day I felt like I was suffocating. So you left. So I left. Took my savings, bought this land, never looked back." He glanced at her. "My father died 2 years ago. Never forgave me for leaving, wrote me out of his will, told everyone I was a disappointment. And you know what? I don't regret it, because this life, hard as it is mine." Evelyn understood. It was exactly what she'd been trying to find. A life that belonged to her, not to someone else's expectations. "Do you ever wish you'd done it differently?" she asked. "Sometimes. But wishing doesn't change anything. All you can do is move forward and try not to make the same mistakes twice." "What if I can't beat him? What if—" "Then we'll deal with it. Together." Rowan stood and moved toward the door. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard, and the day after that, and probably the day after that. But we'll get through it." "Rowan?" He paused in the doorway. "Thank you." He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Evelyn set down her coffee and lay back, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Outside, the wind whispered across the mountains, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. She was still afraid. That hadn't changed. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid alone. And maybe that was enough to keep fighting. The next 3 weeks were a strange kind of torture. Silas stayed in Black Hollow, taking up residence at the hotel. He didn't come back to the ranch, but his presence was everywhere. Evelyn saw him in town when she and Rowan went for supplies. He'd be standing outside the mercantile or the bank, watching her with cold, patient eyes. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just watched. It was worse than threats. Thomas filed the legal responses and started building their case, but the process was agonizingly slow. Depositions had to be scheduled, witnesses had to be interviewed, documents had to be gathered and certified. Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued. Cattle needed tending, spring planting had to be done. A pregnant mare needed constant monitoring. Evelyn threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. But every time she rode into town, every time she saw Silas's silhouette in the distance, the fear came rushing back. And then things started going wrong. Small things at first. A section of fence that had been repaired suddenly broke again. 3 chickens disappeared overnight. A barn door that Rowan swore he'd latched was found open the next morning, and 2 horses had wandered off. They found the horses eventually, but it cost them a whole day of searching. "This doesn't feel like coincidence," Rowan said, examining the broken fence line. "This was cut. Look at the wire." Evelyn looked. He was right. The wire hadn't snapped from tension or weather. It had been deliberately severed. Silas? Or someone he hired? Why would he do this? To make us look incompetent, to prove we can't manage the ranch. Rowan's jaw was tight. If he can show that our property is falling apart, it strengthens his case that you're not capable of making good decisions. Evelyn felt sick. So what do? We document everything, take photographs if we can, keep detailed records, and we watch our backs. But watching their backs meant constant vigilance, meant sleeping in shifts, meant never quite relaxing, never quite feeling safe. The strain started to show. Rowan became quieter, more distant, not cold, just stretched thin. He was trying to protect the ranch, protect Evelyn, keep everything running smoothly, and it was wearing him down. Evelyn could see it in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd stare into the fire at night like he was fighting battles in his head. One evening, after another long day of repairs and setbacks, Evelyn found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. "Rowan?" He looked up, and she saw exhaustion written across his face. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not. I'm handling it. You're falling apart." He stood abruptly. "I'm keeping us alive. That's what I'm doing. Keeping the ranch running, keeping Silas at bay, keeping you safe. And it's—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "It's what?" Evelyn pressed gently. "It's a lot," he admitted finally. "I thought I could handle this, but every time I fix something, something else breaks. Every time I think we're making progress, Silas finds a new way to sabotage us. And I'm running out of money and time and patience." Evelyn moved closer. "You're not doing this alone." "Yes, I am. You're helping, but what? I'm not capable? I'm not strong enough?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Rowan looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "I mean, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I'm going to fail, that I won't be able to protect you, that Silas is going to find some legal loophole or some new way to hurt us, and I won't be able to stop him." Evelyn had never heard him sound like this. Vulnerable, uncertain. "You're not going to fail," she said. "You don't know that. I know you. You don't give up. Ever. Even when you probably should. Maybe I should this time. Maybe I'm just dragging you into a fight we can't win." "Stop," Evelyn said firmly. She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. I left Philadelphia because I was tired of being afraid. And yes, I'm still afraid now. But it's different, because before, I was afraid and alone. Now I'm afraid and I have you. I don't know if that's enough. It is, because we're not doing this alone anymore. We're doing it together." For a moment, Rowan just stared at her. Then something shifted in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the stubborn refusal to surrender that had kept him going all these years. "Together," he repeated quietly. "Together," Evelyn confirmed. He nodded slowly. Then, without warning, he pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they'd really touched like this. Not a steadying hand or a brief contact, an actual embrace. Evelyn stiffened for half a second, old instinct screaming at her to pull away. But then she let herself relax, let herself lean into the solid warmth of him. They stood there in the barn, holding each other, 2 people who'd been running from different things and somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. "We're going to get through this," Rowan said into her hair. "I believe you," Evelyn whispered, and for the first time she actually did. But the next morning brought news that shattered whatever fragile hope they'd built. Martha rode out to the ranch at dawn, her face pale. There's been a development, she said without preamble. Pritchard's agreed to testify for Silas. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What? Pritchard's going to tell the court that you're unstable, that the ranch is failing under your influence, that Rowan's judgment has been compromised since you arrived. Martha looked grim. Silas offered him something. Money, probably. Or maybe a promise to sell him your land once he takes you back east. Can he do that? Evelyn asked desperately. He can try. And with Pritchard's testimony backing him up, it makes Silas's case a lot stronger. Rowan swore viciously. When's the hearing? 2 weeks. Judge Crawford's coming up from Laramie to preside. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare for a fight that could decide everything. Evelyn felt the walls closing in again, felt the old helplessness rising up, threatening to swallow her. But then she looked at Rowan and she saw something she recognized. Not defeat, determination. All right, Rowan said, then we have 2 weeks to build a better case. Who else can we get to testify? Martha thought for a moment. Some of the ranchers who spoke up at the meeting might help. A few of the townspeople who've seen Evelyn working, maybe even the doctor who treated her when she first arrived. I never saw a doctor, Evelyn said. You should. Have him document any old injuries, anything that corroborates your story about Silas's abuse. It made sense, but the thought of being examined, of having someone catalog her scars like evidence in a case, made Evelyn feel sick. Still, she nodded. I'll do it. Good. I'll send word to Thomas. He'll want to prepare. Martha mounted her horse. And be careful. If Pritchard's working with Silas now, there's no telling what else they might try. She rode off, and Evelyn and Rowan stood in the yard, facing the truth of what was coming. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war, and they were running out of weapons to fight it with. The storm hit on the 10th day. Not a legal storm or another attack from Silas, an actual storm, the kind that turned the sky black and the temperature brutal, the kind that reminded everyone that Wyoming didn't care about human problems. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind screaming against the house and Rowan already up, pulling on his coat. What's happening? She asked, stumbling out of bed. Big one, worse than February. He was checking the rifle, loading extra ammunition into his pockets. We need to secure the barn and move the cattle to lower ground before it gets worse. How bad is it going to get? Bad enough that we might lose animals if we don't move fast. They dressed quickly, layering every piece of warm clothing they owned. Outside, the wind was already vicious, and snow was falling sideways. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight. Rowan tied a rope between the house and the barn, the same safety line they'd used in February. Stay close. If we get separated, follow the rope back. They fought their way to the barn, and Rowan started saddling horses while Evelyn checked on the other animals. The cattle in the near pasture were already restless, sensing the danger. We need to move them to the South Valley, Rowan shouted over the wind. There's shelter there, rock formations that'll block the worst of it. That's 3 miles. I know, but if we leave them here, they'll freeze or scatter. We'll lose half the herd. Evelyn nodded and mounted her horse. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside where it was safe, but she'd learned that safety was a luxury ranchers couldn't afford. They rode out into the storm, pushing the cattle ahead of them. The animals were panicked, fighting every step. The snow was so thick Evelyn could barely see Rowan even though he was only 30 feet away. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned from the cold. But she kept riding, kept pushing, kept the cattle moving. It took 2 hours to reach the valley. 2 hours of brutal, exhausting work. By the time they got the herd settled into the sheltered area, both of them were half frozen and completely exhausted. That's all we can do, Rowan said, his lips blue. We need to get back before we lose the trail. They turned the horses toward home, but the storm had intensified. Visibility was down to a few feet. Rowan led the way, relying on memory and instinct to find the path. And then Evelyn's horse stumbled. The animal went down hard, throwing her into a snowbank. Pain exploded through her shoulder as she hit the ground. Evelyn! Rowan was off his horse instantly, pulling her up. You hurt? My shoulder, I think I... She tried to move it and gasped. Something's wrong. Rowan checked quickly, his hands surprisingly gentle. It's dislocated. We need to get you home and pop it back in. Can you do that? I've done it before, but not out here. Not in this. He looked around and Evelyn saw concern flash across his face. We're still 2 miles from the ranch. Then we keep going. You're injured, and we'll both be dead if we stay here. Rowan helped her back onto her horse, holding her steady until she found her balance. The pain in her shoulder was excruciating, but she gritted her teeth and held on. They continued through the storm, moving slower now. Evelyn could feel herself fading, the cold, the pain, the exhaustion all dragging her down. Her vision started to blur. "Stay with me," Rowan called. "Don't fall asleep, you hear me? Stay awake." "I'm trying." "Try harder." It should have made her angry. Instead, it kept her focused, gave her something to hold on to. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, she saw a shape emerging from the white. The barn. They'd made it. Rowan helped her down and half carried her to the house. Inside, he sat her by the fire and started peeling off her frozen layers. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "I know." He positioned her arm carefully, then pulled. Something in her shoulder made a horrible popping sound, and Evelyn screamed. But then the pain eased, not completely, but enough that she could breathe. Rowan fashioned a sling from a torn sheet and helped her into it. "You need to keep it immobilized for a few days. No heavy work." "We don't have a few days. The hearing's in 4 days. Then you'll testify with one arm. But if you try to use that shoulder before it heals, you'll do permanent damage." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she was too tired, too cold, too worn down by everything. Rowan made hot coffee and forced her to drink it. Then he added more wood to the fire and checked the windows. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "We're stuck here for at least a day. Maybe 2. "What about the cattle? They're as safe as we can make them. Now we focus on not freezing to death." He was right. But sitting still while the storm raged felt wrong, like they should be doing something, fighting somehow. Instead, they sat by the fire and waited. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days trapped inside with nothing to do but listen to the wind howl and watch the snow pile higher. 3 days of rationing firewood and food, not knowing when they'd be able to get to town for more supplies. 3 days of knowing that the hearing was approaching and they couldn't do anything to prepare. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The snow stopped. And when Rowan opened the door, they were buried under 4 feet of white. "We need to dig out," Rowan said. "Then check the herd, then get to town," Evelyn finished. "The hearing's tomorrow." They spent the entire day digging paths, checking animals, and assessing damage. 2 calves hadn't made it. One section of the barn roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow, and the road to town was completely impassable. "We're not going to make it to Black Hollow by morning," Rowan said, staring at the buried trail. "Not unless the road crews clear the pass, and that could take days." Evelyn felt panic rising. "We have to be there. If we don't show up—" "I know. Silas will say we ran. He'll say it proves I'm unstable, that I can't handle responsibility." "I know," Rowan said more firmly. He turned to her. "We'll find a way. There's an old mining trail over the East Ridge. It's steep and dangerous, but it might be passable." "In this weather? With my shoulder still healing? You got a better idea?" She didn't. They left before dawn, taking only what they could carry. The mining trail was treacherous, narrow, icy, barely visible under the snow. Twice, Evelyn's horse nearly went over the edge. Each time, Rowan grabbed the reins and pulled them back. It took 6 hours to cross a distance that should have taken 2. By the time they reached Black Hollow, they were frozen, exhausted, and had less than 3 hours before the hearing. Thomas was waiting at the courthouse, pacing anxiously. When he saw them, relief flooded his face. "Thank God. I thought you weren't going to make it." "We almost didn't," Rowan said. "What do we need to know?" Thomas led them inside, talking fast. "Silas has 5 witnesses lined up. Pritchard's testifying about the ranch's poor condition. He's got the telegraph operator who will say you seemed confused when you sent your first letter. A doctor from Philadelphia who will testify about your fragile mental state based on Silas's descriptions. And 2 of Silas's business associates who will corroborate his character. And us? We've got 3 ranchers willing to testify that you're competent and capable. Martha will speak about your contributions to the community. And the local doctor examined you last week. He documented old injuries consistent with your story about abuse. Is it enough? Evelyn asked. Thomas hesitated. I don't know. Judge Crawford's fair, but he's also old-fashioned. He might side with the blood relative unless we give him a strong reason not to. They had an hour to prepare before the hearing started. Thomas coached them on what to say, how to respond to questions, what traps to avoid. But when they finally walked into the courtroom and Evelyn saw Silas sitting at the front table, perfectly composed and confident, all the preparation felt inadequate. The judge arrived, a stern-looking man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense expression. He took his seat and surveyed the room. "This is a petition for guardianship," Judge Crawford said. "Mr. Silas Mercer is requesting that his niece, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, be placed under his legal custody due to concerns about her mental fitness and the validity of her marriage. We'll hear testimony from both sides, and I'll make a ruling based on the evidence presented. Mr. Mercer, you may call your first witness." Silas stood smoothly. "Your Honor, I call Gerald Pritchard." Pritchard took the stand, looking every inch the respectable rancher. He testified about the poor condition of the Hayes Ranch, the broken fences, the scattered cattle, the general mismanagement. "In your professional opinion," Silas's lawyer asked, "has the ranch deteriorated since Mrs. Hayes arrived?" "Significantly," Pritchard said. "Rowan Hayes was always a capable rancher, but since he married this woman, everything's fallen apart. It's clear she's a distraction at best, a liability at worst." Thomas stood. "Objection. The witness is speculating about causation without evidence." "Sustained," the judge said. "Stick to observable facts, Mr. Pritchard." But the damage was done. The implication hung in the air. The doctor from Philadelphia testified next, reading from notes about Evelyn's nervous disposition and tendency toward dramatic behavior, all based on conversations with Silas, never having actually examined her. The telegraph operator testified that Evelyn had seemed uncertain and confused when sending letters, though he admitted under cross-examination that lots of people seemed nervous at the telegraph office. By the time Silas's side finished, Evelyn felt like she'd been dismantled piece by piece. Every moment of weakness, every mistake, every difficulty had been cataloged and presented as evidence of her incompetence. Then it was their turn. Thomas called the local doctor first. He testified about the old injuries, but healed fractures, scarring consistent with repeated trauma. He made it clear that Evelyn had been hurt long before coming to Wyoming. "In your medical opinion," Thomas asked, "is Mrs. Hayes mentally sound?" "Completely. She's one of the most resilient patients I've seen. What she's overcome would break most people." The three ranchers testified next. They spoke about seeing Evelyn work, about her contributions at the town meeting, about her clear competence and determination. Martha testified about Evelyn's character, her growth, her place in the community. It was all good testimony, but Evelyn could see the judge's expression, thoughtful but not convinced. Finally, Thomas called Evelyn herself. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, her injured shoulder aching in its sling. Silas watched her with those cold, patient eyes. Thomas started with simple questions. Where was she from? Why did she leave? What was her relationship with Silas? Evelyn answered carefully, keeping her voice steady. But then Silas's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and everything got harder. "Mrs. Hayes, you claim your uncle abused you, yet you never reported this to authorities, never sought help from neighbors or friends. Isn't that convenient?" "I was afraid," Evelyn said. "Of course you were. Just like you're afraid now, which is why you've invented this elaborate story. It's not a story, it's the truth." "Then why did you steal money from your uncle before running away?" "I didn't steal it. That money was my inheritance from my mother, which your uncle was managing on your behalf as your legal guardian. He was stealing it, using it for himself, or so you claim. But you have no proof of that, do you? No documentation, no witnesses, nothing but your word against his." Evelyn's hands clenched. "I know what happened. What you know and what you can prove are two different things." The lawyer leaned forward. "Isn't it true that you have a history of dramatic behavior, of making accusations when you don't get your way?" "No." "Isn't it true that you ran away rather than face responsibilities you found difficult?" "I ran away to save my life." "Or you ran away because you were unstable and impulsive, and now you're trying to justify that decision by vilifying the man who only ever tried to help you." "That's not—" "No further questions," the lawyer said, sitting down. Evelyn sat there, shaking with fury and frustration. Everything she'd said had been twisted, made to sound like lies or delusions. Thomas called Rowan next. Rowan took the stand, and for the first time that day, Evelyn felt a spark of hope, because Rowan didn't embellish or perform. He just spoke plainly. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said, "how would you describe your wife's mental state? Clear, capable, stronger than most people I know. Has she ever shown signs of instability or poor judgment?" "No. She's made hard decisions under difficult circumstances and handled them well. Even during the recent storm?" "Especially during the storm. She helped move 80 head of cattle through a blizzard, got thrown from her horse, dislocated her shoulder, and still made it home. Then rode a dangerous trail to get here today. That's not instability, that's courage." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. Your witness." Silas's lawyer stood. "Mr. Hayes, you needed a wife for your ranch, correct?" "I needed help, yes. And Mrs. Hayes needed an escape from Philadelphia. She needed a fresh start. So this marriage was a transaction, convenience for both of you. It started that way." "Started?" Rowan looked at Evelyn, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "It's not convenience anymore," he said quietly. "I don't know exactly when it changed, but somewhere between the blizzards and the fences and the fights, it became real. She became my partner, my wife. Not because I needed her to be, but because I chose her to be." The courtroom went silent. Silas's lawyer recovered quickly. "Very touching, but feelings don't change facts. Your ranch is struggling, you're in debt, and your wife has brought nothing but trouble since arriving." "My ranch was struggling before she came," Rowan said. "It's struggling less now because she's here. As for trouble, that's not coming from her. It's coming from him." He looked directly at Silas. "A man who can't let go of control even when the person he's trying to control is 3 territories away." "No further questions," the lawyer said tightly. Judge Crawford looked between both sides. "I'll take a short recess to consider the testimony. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. Everyone filed out of the courtroom. Evelyn and Rowan stood in the hallway, not speaking. There was nothing to say. Everything now depended on the judge. Thomas paced nervously. "I think it went well. Better than expected, but Crawford's hard to read." "What are our actual chances?" Rowan asked. 50-50, maybe slightly better. He seemed moved by your testimony. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When they filed back in, Judge Crawford had a stack of papers in front of him. He looked at Silas, then at Evelyn, then at his notes. "I've reviewed the testimony and the documentation," he said. "This is a complicated case. On one hand, Mr. Mercer has presented concerns that warrant consideration. A young woman leaving her home state suddenly, marrying a stranger, living in isolated conditions. These are facts that require scrutiny." Evelyn's heart sank. "However," the judge continued, "the evidence of abuse is compelling. The medical documentation supports Mrs. Hayes's claims. The witnesses to her competence are credible, and most importantly, Mrs. Hayes is 23 years old, legally an adult capable of making her own decisions." He looked at Silas. "Mr. Mercer, I understand your concern for your niece, but concern doesn't constitute grounds for guardianship when the individual in question is demonstrably capable of managing her own affairs. Mrs. Hayes has built a life here. She has a legal marriage, community support, and no evidence of mental incapacity." Silas's face darkened. "Therefore," Judge Crawford said, "I'm denying the petition for guardianship. Mrs. Evelyn Hayes will remain under her own authority, and her marriage to Rowan Hayes is recognized as legal and binding." Relief crashed over Evelyn so hard she almost collapsed. Rowan's hand found hers and squeezed, but the judge wasn't finished. "However, I'm also ordering an investigation into the inheritance dispute. Mr. Mercer, if Mrs. Hayes's claims about misappropriation of funds are accurate, you'll be required to provide a full accounting. Court adjourned." The gavel came down. Evelyn stood there, unable to process it. They'd won. She was free. Silas stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at Evelyn across the courtroom, and she saw murder in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You think you've won, but you've only made this harder on yourself." "Leave her alone," Rowan said, stepping between them. "Or what? You'll threaten me? Attack me in front of a federal marshal?" Silas smiled. That terrible smile Evelyn remembered. I'm a patient man, Hayes. I can wait. And when you least expect it, when you think you're safe, I'll be there, and I'll take back what's mine. She was never yours, Rowan said. We'll see. Silas walked out, his 2 hired men following. Thomas let out a long breath. Well, that could have gone worse. Could it? Evelyn asked shakily. You're free. Legally, officially free. He can't touch you now without breaking the law. Thomas hesitated. But Hayes is right to be cautious. Silas doesn't strike me as someone who accepts defeat gracefully. What do we do? Evelyn asked. You go home. You rebuild. You live your life. Thomas packed up his papers. And you watch your backs, because men like Silas don't forget. They left the courthouse and walked into the cold afternoon air. The town was starting to dig out from the storm, and Black Hollow looked almost peaceful under its blanket of snow. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. They stayed in town that night at the hotel, too exhausted to attempt the journey home. Evelyn lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. They'd won. She was free. So why did she feel like the fight was just beginning? A soft knock came at the door. Evelyn? It's me. She opened it and Rowan stood there, looking as tired as she felt. Can't sleep? He asked. No. Me neither. He hesitated. Can I come in? She stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. They sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders almost touching. What you said in court, Evelyn said quietly, about it becoming real. Did you mean that? Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Yeah, I meant it. When did it change for you? I don't know exactly. Maybe when you stood up at the town meeting, maybe during the storm, maybe when you refused to run even though you were terrified. He looked at her. What about you? Evelyn thought about it. When you said I didn't have to be afraid in your house, and then you actually meant it. Nobody's ever done that before, just kept their word like it was simple. It is simple. No, it's not. Not for most people. They sat in silence, and Evelyn realized how close they were, how easy it would be to close the distance between them. But she didn't. Neither did he. Because some things needed time, needed space to grow naturally instead of being forced. We should get some sleep, Rowan said finally. Long ride home tomorrow. Yeah. He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. Evelyn? Yeah? We're going to be okay. Whatever Silas tries next, we'll handle it. You don't know that. I do. Because we've already survived the worst of it. Everything from here is just cleanup. He left, and Evelyn lay back down. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe the worst was behind them, but deep in her gut, she knew better. The worst was still coming. They rode back to the ranch the next morning, taking the main road this time since it had been partially cleared. The journey was cold but uneventful, and when they finally saw the house and barn emerging from the snow-covered landscape, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not just relief at being home, but relief at seeing home. This place had stopped being Rowan's ranch and started being theirs. They spent the next 2 days catching up on work. The barn roof needed more repairs. The cattle had to be checked. Supplies had to be inventoried. Normal work. Simple work. It felt like a gift after weeks of legal battles and constant tension. On the 3rd day, Evelyn was in the barn feeding the horses when she heard riders approaching. Her heart jumped, but when she looked out, she saw it was just Fletcher from the mercantile with his delivery wagon. Afternoon, Mrs. Hayes, he called. Got your order from town. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. He started unloading supplies, and Evelyn helped carry them inside. As he was leaving, he paused. Heard about the hearing. Glad it worked out for you. Thank you. Also heard that Mercer fellow left town yesterday. Took the stage east. Good riddance, if you ask me. Evelyn felt something release in her chest. He's gone? Yep. Him and those 2 thugs he brought with him. Town's better without them. After Fletcher left, Evelyn found Rowan in the south pasture and told him. Silas left. He's gone. Rowan didn't look as relieved as she'd expected. Good, but don't assume it's over. You think he'll come back? I think he's the kind of man who doesn't give up. He's regrouping, planning his next move. Rowan met her eyes. We stay alert. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. Spring slowly pushed winter back. The snow melted, grass began to grow, the ranch came back to life. And slowly, carefully, so did Evelyn. She started sleeping through the night without nightmares, started working without constantly looking over her shoulder, started letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was actually safe. She and Rowan fell into an easy rhythm, working together during the day, talking by the fire at night. Not quite romantic, but not just business partners either. Something in between that felt comfortable and right. One evening in late April, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Rowan said, "You know, we're actually pretty good at this." "At what?" "Being married?" Evelyn smiled. "You sound surprised." "I am, a little. I thought it would be harder." "It was hard. It's just less hard now." "Less hard. That's romantic." She laughed. A real laugh. The kind she hadn't heard from herself in years. "Since when do you care about romance?" "I don't, but I figured you might. I care about honesty more than romance." "Good, because I've got plenty of honesty and no romance whatsoever." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Evelyn let herself think about the future. Not as something to fear, but as something to build. But that night, while they slept, someone set fire to the barn. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. For a confused moment, she thought the fire in the house had gotten out of control. But then she heard the horses screaming, and her blood turned to ice. She was out of bed and running before her mind fully caught up. Rowan was already in the main room, pulling on his boots, grabbing his coat. "The barn," he said. "Stay here." Like hell. They ran outside together, and the scene that met them was nightmare made real. Flames were climbing the barn walls, orange and hungry, lighting up the night sky. The horses inside were panicking, their screams cutting through the roar of fire. "Get the water buckets," Rowan shouted. "I'm going in for the animals." "You can't." But he was already running toward the barn door. Evelyn grabbed every bucket she could find, filled them from the pump, and started throwing water on the flames. It was useless, like spitting on a bonfire. But she kept doing it anyway because stopping meant accepting that everything was burning. Rowan emerged from the smoke leading two horses, their eyes white with terror. He shoved them toward the corral and went back in. Evelyn's heart hammered. The flames were spreading fast. The roof was starting to collapse. "Rowan!" she screamed. He came out with the third horse, coughing hard. "Two more, and the cows in the back stalls. The roof's going to come down." "I know." He went back in anyway, and Evelyn wanted to follow him but knew she'd just be in the way. So she kept throwing water, kept trying to slow the fire's advance, kept praying that he'd come out alive. A section of roof collapsed with a crash that made her jump. Sparks flew into the night sky. And then Rowan was there, leading the last two horses and pushing a terrified cow ahead of him. His face was black with soot, his clothes smoking. "That's all of them," he gasped. "The barn's lost. We need to keep it from spreading to the house." They worked through the night, throwing water, beating back flames with wet blankets, creating fire breaks. Other ranchers arrived. Someone had seen the glow and raised the alarm. By dawn, they'd managed to contain the fire to just the barn and one storage shed. But the barn was gone, completely destroyed. Years of work and investment reduced to smoking ruins. Everyone stood around in the gray morning light, exhausted and soot-covered, staring at the devastation. One of the ranchers walked the perimeter, examining the debris. Then he called out, "Hayes, come look at this." Rowan walked over, Evelyn following. The rancher pointed to a section of charred wood near what used to be the barn door. "See that? That's accelerant residue. Kerosene, probably. This wasn't an accident. Someone set this fire deliberately." The words hung in the air like poison. "Silas," Evelyn whispered. "Or someone he paid," Rowan said grimly. "He left town, but that doesn't mean he didn't leave people behind to finish the job." Martha Fletcher, who'd ridden out with the others, shook her head. "This is beyond property damage. This is attempted murder. If you'd been sleeping heavier, if the smoke hadn't woken you in time." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "We need to get the marshal," one of the ranchers said. "This is criminal. Marshal won't do anything without proof," Rowan said. "And we don't have proof it was Silas, just suspicion." "Then what do we do?" Rowan looked at the ruins, his jaw set. We rebuild, and we prepare for whatever comes next. The other ranchers left as the sun climbed higher, promising to send supplies and help when they could. But Evelyn could see the concern in their eyes. This kind of attack wasn't normal, even for the rough frontier. This was personal, vicious. After everyone left, Evelyn and Rowan stood alone in the yard, looking at the smoking remains of the barn. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said quietly. "For what?" "For bringing this into your life. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't—" "Stop," Rowan interrupted. "This isn't your fault. This is Silas being a vindictive bastard who can't accept that he lost. That's on him, not you. But the barn can be rebuilt. The animals are safe. The house is safe. You're safe." He turned to face her. "Those are the things that matter. How can you be so calm about this?" "I'm not calm. I'm furious. But fury doesn't rebuild barns or catch 8 arsonists, so I'm putting it aside until I can use it productively." Evelyn wanted that kind of control, that ability to compartmentalize rage and fear and just keep moving forward. But she didn't have it. All she had was the sick feeling in her stomach and the certainty that this was her fault. That night, they slept in shifts, one person always awake and watching. Rowan kept his rifle loaded and within reach. Every sound outside made Evelyn jump. This was worse than waiting for the hearing, worse than knowing Silas was in town, because now he was a ghost. Invisible, but everywhere, capable of striking at any moment. 3 days after the fire, a rider came to the ranch. Not one of the locals. A stranger, well-dressed, riding an expensive horse. Rowan met him in the yard, rifle in hand. "Can I help you?" The man dismounted and pulled an envelope from his coat. "I'm looking for Mrs. Evelyn Hayes." "Why?" "I have a message for her from Silas Mercer." Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. Her stomach knotted. "I'm Evelyn Hayes." The man handed her the envelope. "Mr. Mercer asked me to deliver this personally. He said you'd understand." He mounted his horse and rode off without waiting for a response. Evelyn stared at the envelope like it was a snake. Rowan came up beside her. "You don't have to open it." "Yes, I do." She tore it open with shaking hands and unfolded the letter inside. "Evelyn, you cost me a great deal. Money, time, reputation. I don't forget debts. What happened to your barn was just the beginning. I can reach you anywhere. I can hurt you in ways you haven't even imagined. But I'm not unreasonable. Here's my offer. Sign over your inheritance to me, along with a statement saying you left Philadelphia of your own free will and that I never harmed you. Do that and I'll leave you alone. Forever. Refuse and I'll destroy everything you've built. Your ranch, your reputation, your husband. You have 1 week to decide. Choose wisely." Silas Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly she dropped the letter. Rowan picked it up and read it, his expression darkening with every line. "Extortion," he said flatly. "He's trying to blackmail you into giving up your inheritance and clearing his name. If I don't, he'll keep attacking us. The next fire might kill someone, or he'll sabotage the cattle, or poison the well, or we call his bluff." "This isn't a bluff, Rowan. You saw what he did to the barn." "I saw what someone did to the barn. We don't have proof it was Silas. Who else would it be?" "Pritchard, maybe. Someone else with a grudge. The point is we can't prove it was him. And if we can't prove it, we can't let him dictate our lives through fear." Evelyn wanted to believe that. But fear was already dictating her life. It had been for years. "What if I just give him what he wants?" she said quietly. "The money doesn't matter. I don't care about the inheritance. If giving it to him makes this stop—" "It won't stop," Rowan said firmly. "Men like Silas don't stop when they get what they want. They just want more. You give him this, he'll come back next year with another demand. And another, until there's nothing left. Then what do we do?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. Then he said, "We finish this. Permanently." Something in his tone made Evelyn's blood run cold. "What does that mean?" "It means we stop reacting and start acting. We stop letting him control the fight." "Rowan, we can't—" "I'm not talking about murder," he said, though his expression suggested he'd considered it. "I'm talking about fighting back in a way that actually hurts him. Legally, financially, publicly." "How?" Thomas said the judge ordered an investigation into the inheritance. We push that forward. We dig into Silas's finances, find proof he misappropriated your money, and nail him in court. Once he's facing criminal charges, he'll be too busy defending himself to come after us. It sounded good in theory, but theory didn't account for the reality of Silas's resources and connections. That could take months, Evelyn said. And in the meantime, we defend ourselves. We get help watching the ranch. We document every threat. We build a case so airtight that even Silas's lawyers can't wriggle out of it. Evelyn wanted to believe it was possible, but after everything they'd been through, hope felt dangerous. Still, what choice did they have? Okay, she said. We fight back. They sent word to Thomas Fletcher immediately, and he arrived within 3 days with a plan. He'd already started investigating Silas's financial records through the Philadelphia courts, and what he'd found was damning. Your uncle didn't just misappropriate your inheritance, Thomas explained, spreading documents across the kitchen table. He embezzled it, used your mother's money to cover his own business debts, to buy property in his name, to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. And he's been falsifying records to hide it. Can you prove that? Rowan asked. With time, yes. But we need more documentation, bank records, property deeds, testimony from people who knew your mother's estate. Thomas looked at Evelyn. Do you remember the name of your mother's lawyer? The one who handled her will? Richard Bellamy. He had an office on Market Street. I'll contact him. If he's still practicing, he might have copies of the original documents that Silas couldn't alter. Thomas hesitated. But Evelyn, you need to understand. If we pursue this, Silas will fight back hard. He could expose private details of your life, drag you through the mud publicly. It won't be pleasant. Nothing about this has been pleasant, Evelyn said. But I'm tired of running. I want him to face consequences for what he did. Thomas nodded approvingly. Good. Then here's what we do. The plan was simple in concept, complicated in execution. Thomas would gather evidence of Silas's financial crimes while simultaneously filing harassment charges based on the threatening letter and the barn fire. They'd force Silas to fight on multiple fronts, stretching his resources and attention. Meanwhile, Rowan reached out to the other ranchers. Several agreed to help patrol the Hayes property in rotating shifts. It meant they weren't alone anymore, weren't vulnerable to another attack. It should have made Evelyn feel safer. Instead, it made her feel like they were preparing for war, because they were. 1 week after receiving Silas's ultimatum, with no response from them, things escalated. Evelyn was riding the eastern boundary checking fence lines when she saw them. 3 men on horseback, too far away to identify but close enough to be a threat. She turned her horse and rode hard back toward the ranch. The men followed, not bothering to hide themselves anymore. By the time she reached the yard, Rowan was already outside with 2 of the ranchers who'd been helping keep watch. 3 riders coming in fast, Evelyn called out, sliding from her horse. I see them, Rowan said. He didn't raise his rifle, but his hand was on it. The 3 riders pulled up at the edge of the property. Evelyn recognized 2 of them, Silas's hired men from before. The third was a stranger, hard-faced and mean-looking. Mrs. Hayes, one of them called out. Your uncle wants an answer. She doesn't owe him anything, Rowan said. That's not what Mr. Mercer thinks. He's not a patient man, and you've tested that patience enough. Tell Mercer to come and talk to me himself instead of sending hired thugs, Rowan said. The stranger smiled coldly. Mr. Mercer doesn't waste time on people who don't understand reasonable offers. He sent us to make sure you understand the consequences of refusing. We understand just fine, Rowan said. Now get off my property. Or what? You'll shoot us? In front of witnesses? The stranger gestured to the 2 ranchers standing beside Rowan. That's murder, Hayes. You'd hang. Self-defense isn't murder, and you're trespassing with clear threatening intent. The tension stretched tight enough to snap. Evelyn could see fingers drifting toward guns, could see the calculation in everyone's eyes, and then Martha Fletcher's voice cut through the standoff. That's far enough, gentlemen. Everyone turned. Martha was riding up the trail with Marshal Greer beside her. The marshal surveyed the scene with a weary expression. What's going on here? Just delivering a message, one of Silas's men said quickly. A threatening message, Rowan corrected, to a woman they've been harassing for months. Marshal Greer sighed. I've heard about your situation, Hayes, and I've heard about the barn fire. He looked at Silas's men. You boys have names? They exchanged glances but didn't answer. Didn't think so. Well, here's how this is going to work. You're going to turn around and leave this property. And if I hear about any more fires or threats or intimidation, I'm going to assume it's you and act accordingly. Are we clear? We're just working for... I don't care who you're working for. I care that you're harassing citizens in my jurisdiction. Now leave. The three men hesitated, then turned their horses and rode off. But the look they gave Evelyn as they left promised this wasn't over. After they disappeared, Marshal Greer dismounted and walked over to Rowan. I can't prove Silas Mercer set that fire, he said quietly. But I'm not stupid. I know what's happening here, and while I can't arrest him without evidence, I can make his life difficult. I've sent word to the federal marshal in Cheyenne about the extortion letter. That's a federal crime. Will they investigate? Rowan asked. Eventually, but federal investigations move slow. In the meantime, you watch yourselves. If Mercer escalates again, document everything and send for me immediately. He rode off with Martha, who threw Evelyn a concerned look before leaving. This is getting worse, Evelyn said quietly after they left. No, Rowan said. This is getting finished, one way or another. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch in the darkness, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. The door opened and Rowan came out carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat beside her. You okay? No. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the night sounds. I keep thinking about what my life would be like if I'd never left Philadelphia, Evelyn said finally. If I'd just married Edmund Carver like Silas wanted. You'd be miserable. Maybe, but I wouldn't be putting other people in danger. You wouldn't have lost your barn. The other ranchers wouldn't have to patrol our property. None of this would be happening. Rowan set down his cup. You know what I think about sometimes? What my life would be like if you hadn't answered my advertisement. If I was still out here alone trying to manage this ranch by myself, slowly failing without admitting it. You weren't failing. I was drowning. Slowly but definitely drowning. Too proud to ask for help. Too stubborn to admit I couldn't do it alone. He looked at her. You didn't just help with the work, Evelyn. You gave me a reason to fight for this place. Before you came, I was just surviving. Now I'm actually living. Evelyn's throat tightened. Even with all this chaos? Especially with all this chaos, because at least now I'm fighting for something that matters. The ranch matters. Not just the ranch. You. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn had spent so long afraid of letting anyone get close, afraid of trusting, afraid of needing. But sitting here with Rowan, she realized that fear had been keeping her alive but not living. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of Silas? Of everything, of losing this, of it all falling apart, of, she hesitated, of caring about you and having that used against me. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my father used to say that fear was just information. It tells you something matters. The question is what you do with that information. Do you let it paralyze you, or do you let it motivate you? What do? I use it. Fear of losing the ranch makes me work harder. Fear of Silas hurting you makes me more vigilant. Fear of failing you makes me try harder to be someone worth depending on. You already are. He looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. So are you. Evelyn realized how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to close that last bit of distance. But before she could decide whether to take that step, Rowan stood. We should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. He went inside and Evelyn sat alone on the porch, holding her coffee and wondering when exactly she'd fallen in love with her husband. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Fletcher arrived at the ranch a week later with a man Evelyn didn't recognize. Older, well-dressed, with tired eyes. Evelyn, this is Richard Bellamy, Thomas said. Your mother's lawyer. Evelyn's heart jumped. Mr. Bellamy, I thought you'd retired. I had, Bellamy said. But when Thomas contacted me about your situation, I felt obligated to help. Your mother was a good woman. She deserves better than what happened to her estate. He set a leather case on the table and pulled out a stack of documents. When your mother died, she left very specific instructions about her inheritance. The money was to be held in trust for you until you turned 21, with your uncle as trustee, but with strict limitations. He could only use the funds for your direct benefit, education, housing, medical care, nothing else. He used it for everything else, Evelyn said. I know. I have the original trust documents, which clearly outline the restrictions. And I have bank records showing that Silas withdrew funds for his own business ventures, property purchases, personal expenses. Bellamy spread the papers across the table. This is ironclad evidence of embezzlement. Thomas was grinning. With this, we can file criminal charges. Silas will face prosecution in Philadelphia. He'll be too busy defending himself to come after Evelyn anymore. How long will it take? Rowan asked. To file charges? A few weeks. To actually prosecute? Months, maybe longer. But the charges themselves will be enough to stop him. No man wants to escalate a harassment campaign while facing criminal prosecution. It was the break they'd been waiting for, the weapon they needed. But Bellamy wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Your mother's will included a clause that I never told Silas about. She didn't trust him completely, even before her death, so she stipulated that if there was ever evidence of misappropriation, her entire estate would bypass him entirely and go directly to you, including property he thought he owned. Evelyn stared at him. What property? A house in Philadelphia, 3 investment properties in New York, and a significant amount in bonds and securities. Bellamy pulled out another document. Combined, your actual inheritance is worth approximately $40,000. The number was staggering. $40,000. She thought the inheritance was a few thousand at most. Silas doesn't know about this? Rowan asked. He knows about some of it, but not the full extent. And he doesn't know about the clause that strips him of control if he misuses the funds. Bellamy looked at Evelyn. You're not just rich, Mrs. Hayes. You're rich enough to destroy him in court. That night, after Bellamy and Thomas left, Evelyn and Rowan sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents that represented the end of Silas's power over her. $40,000, Evelyn said, still trying to process it. I could rebuild the barn 10 times over. You could buy Pritchard's ranch if you wanted, Rowan said. I don't want Pritchard's ranch. I want this ranch. With you. The words came out before she could second-guess them. Rowan looked at her, something shifting in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying this stopped being a business arrangement for me a long time ago. I'm saying I want to stay here, not because I have to, but because I choose to. She took a breath. I'm saying I love you, and I don't care if it's complicated or messy or if we're in the middle of a fight with my psychotic uncle. I love you anyway. Rowan was silent for so long that Evelyn started to panic. Maybe she'd misread everything. Maybe he didn't feel the same way. Then he stood, walked around the table, and pulled her up into his arms. I love you too, he said quietly. Have for a while now. Just didn't know if I was allowed to say it. You're allowed. He kissed her then, finally, properly, the way 2 people kiss when they've been waiting months for permission. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was breathless and smiling. So what now? She asked. Now? We file the charges. We destroy Silas legally, and then we rebuild the barn and get on with our lives. Just like that? Just like that. It sounded so simple when he said it. But 2 days later, Silas proved he had one more move left. Evelyn was alone at the ranch. Rowan had ridden to town to meet with Thomas about the criminal charges. The ranchers who'd been helping patrol were out checking the herd. She was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. For a moment, she thought it was one of the hired men again. But as the figure got closer, her blood ran cold. Silas. He'd come himself this time. Evelyn dropped the laundry and ran for the house, for the rifle Rowan kept loaded by the door. But Silas was faster. He dismounted and intercepted her before she reached the porch. Hello, Evelyn. His voice was calm, conversational, terrifying. Get off this property, Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. Not until we talk. You and I have unfinished business. We have nothing to discuss. Oh, I think we do. I heard about your little lawyer friend and his documents. Very clever. You always were more resourceful than I gave you credit for. Then you know you've lost. Criminal charges are being filed against you in Philadelphia. It's over, Silas. Is it? He smiled that cold smile. Because I still have options. I could burn down your house right now. I could wait for your husband to come home and shoot him. I could make your life so unbearable that you'd beg to sign those papers. You won't do any of that. Why not? Because you're not stupid. You're vicious and controlling, but you're not stupid. If anything happens to me or Rowan, you'll be the first person they investigate. And with the criminal charges pending, you can't afford more scrutiny. Silas's smile faltered slightly. You've gotten brave. I've gotten free. There's a difference. He took a step toward her, and Evelyn forced herself not to back away, not to show fear. You think you're free? Silas said softly. But you'll never be free of me, Evelyn. I'll always be there in the back of your mind. Every time something goes wrong, you'll wonder if it's me. Every stranger on the road will look like a threat. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Maybe, Evelyn said, but at least I'll be looking over my shoulder while living my life, not cowering in a cage you built. For the first time, she saw real anger flash in Silas's eyes. Not the cold, controlled anger she was used to, something hotter, more dangerous. He reached for her, and instinct took over. Evelyn's hand closed around a piece of firewood stacked by the porch. She swung it hard, catching Silas across the temple. He went down, stunned, but not unconscious. And Evelyn ran. She made it to the house, grabbed the rifle, and turned just as Silas staggered to his feet, blood running down the side of his face. Stay back, she said, raising the rifle. You won't shoot me. Try me. Silas took a step forward, and Evelyn pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. It kicked up dirt 3 feet to Silas's left, a warning shot, not aimed to kill but close enough to make her point. Silas froze, eyes wide. The next one won't miss, Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Rowan and 2 of the ranchers appeared, racing toward the house. Rowan took in the scene instantly. Evelyn with the rifle, Silas bleeding, the tension crackling between them. You all right? He asked, dismounting fast. I'm fine. He showed up trying to threaten me. I defended myself. One of the ranchers grabbed Silas's arms, restraining him. We got him. Should we send for the marshal? Yes, Rowan said. He walked over to Evelyn and gently took the rifle from her shaking hands. It's okay. You're okay. Evelyn nodded, but she couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was crashing through her, making her lightheaded. Silas was staring at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely shaken. You actually shot at me, he said, almost disbelieving. And I'll do it again if you ever come near me or my husband again. Marshal Greer arrived within the hour. He listened to Evelyn's account, examined the scene, and looked at Silas's injury. Attempted assault, he said. Trespassing, harassment, and that's just what I can prove right now. He pulled out handcuffs. Silas Mercer, you're under arrest. On what grounds? Silas demanded. On the grounds that you just threatened a woman on her own property after months of documented harassment. Add in the criminal charges being filed in Philadelphia, and you're looking at serious prison time. Silas's face twisted with rage as the cuffs snapped closed. This isn't over. I'll find a way. It's over, the marshal said firmly. And even if I can't make all the charges stick out here, Philadelphia will. You're done. They led Silas away, and Evelyn watched him disappear down the trail, knowing with sudden certainty that she'd never see him again. Not because he was going to prison, though he probably was, but because she wasn't afraid of him anymore. The power he'd held over her for so long had finally broken. Rowan stood beside her, solid and steady. You all right? I shot at him. Yeah, you did. I actually pulled the trigger. I heard. Evelyn started laughing then, slightly hysterical, but genuine. I can't believe I did that. I can, Rowan said. You're the toughest person I know. I'm not tough. I'm terrified. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's the definition of tough. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood there in the yard, holding each other while the sun set behind the mountains. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now? We rebuild the barn, we run the ranch, we live our lives. He pulled back to look at her. We stop letting fear make our decisions. Just like that? Just like that. It wasn't simple. Nothing ever really was. But maybe that was the point. Life wasn't supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be lived, messy, complicated, imperfect, and real. The criminal charges against Silas proceeded exactly as Thomas predicted. The evidence was overwhelming, and facing years in prison, Silas eventually accepted a plea bargain that included paying full restitution to Evelyn and relinquishing any claim to her inheritance. He went to prison for embezzlement, and Evelyn never saw him again. With the inheritance money, they rebuilt the barn, bigger and better than before. They expanded the herd, hired a ranch hand, and slowly transformed the struggling operation into something stable and profitable. But more than that, they built a partnership that went beyond business or survival. They built a marriage based on choice, not necessity. On love that had been tested and earned rather than assumed. The other ranchers stopped seeing Evelyn as an outsider and started seeing her as one of them. Not because she'd proven herself tough, but because she'd proven herself stubborn. And in Wyoming, stubbornness was the most valuable currency. Martha Fletcher still didn't smile much, but she started nodding to Evelyn in town, which was basically a declaration of friendship by Martha's standards. Even Pritchard backed off, though Evelyn suspected that had less to do with respect and more to do with not wanting to cross someone who'd proven willing to shoot at people who threatened her. One evening in late summer, nearly a year after she'd first arrived in Black Hollow, Evelyn and Rowan sat on the porch watching the sunset. The new barn stood solid and complete behind them. The cattle grazed peacefully in the valley. Everything smelled like grass and summer heat and possibility. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Answering my advertisement? Coming out here?" Evelyn thought about it. Thought about everything she'd been through, the fear, the danger, the endless hard work. Thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived, scared and desperate and running. "No," she said. "I don't regret it. You? Not even once. Even with the barn burning and the legal battles and almost getting shot? Even with all of that?" He looked at her. "You know why?" "Why?" "Because you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. A real partner. Someone who fights beside me instead of needing me to fight for them. I needed you to fight for me plenty of times. And you fought for me too. That's the difference." He took her hand. "We're a team. That's rare." Evelyn squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses and strength there. "Yeah, it is." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered across the grass. And Evelyn realized something that probably should have been obvious but felt like a revelation anyway. She was happy. Not perfectly happy. Not free from problems or worries or hard days, but genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never been before. Because happiness, it turned out, wasn't about having an easy life. It was about having a life worth fighting for. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Evelyn said. "What?" "All the women back in Philadelphia who thought I was crazy for leaving, who told me I'd never survive out here." She smiled. "I wonder what they'd think if they could see me now." "What would they think?" "That I'm even crazier than they imagined, living in the middle of nowhere, married to a rancher, shooting at people who threaten me." Rowan laughed. "Sounds about right. But I don't care what they think anymore. That's the really crazy part. I spent so long trying to be what other people wanted, trying to fit into someone else's idea of what my life should look like, and it nearly killed me. And now? Now I'm living the life I chose. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She looked at him. "Because the hardness means it's real. It means it's mine." Rowan nodded slowly. "You know what my father used to say? That the things worth having are the things worth fighting for. I never really understood what he meant until I met you. Because you had to fight for me? Because we had to fight for each other. And for this." He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the endless sky. "None of it came easy, but that's what makes it valuable." They fell silent again, and Evelyn thought about everything they'd survived. The storms and the fires and the legal battles, the fear and the anger and the moments of doubt, but also the small victories. The first time she'd successfully mended a fence. The first real smile they'd shared. The first time they'd looked at each other and seen partners instead of strangers. All of it, the hard parts and the good parts, had led to this moment. To sitting on a porch in Wyoming, holding hands with a man she loved, watching the sunset over land that felt like home. "I love you," Evelyn said quietly. "I love you too." Even when I'm impossible? Especially when you are impossible. That's when you're most yourself. Evelyn smiled. She'd spent so long trying to be less difficult, less demanding, less present, trying to shrink herself down to fit someone else's expectations. But Rowan didn't want less. He wanted exactly who she was, stubborn and scared and determined and real. And that more than anything else was why she'd stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd finally found somewhere she wanted to be. Years later, when people asked Evelyn about her life, and they did ask because her story became the kind of legend small towns love to tell, she never quite knew how to answer. She could have told them about the dramatic parts, about standing up to her abuser, about shooting at a man who'd terrorized her, about fighting legal battles and rebuilding from ashes. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. The truth was that she'd spent her whole life being afraid. Afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of standing up for herself. And then one day, she'd made a choice that terrified her. She'd gotten on a wagon heading west with no guarantee of anything except uncertainty. And slowly, painfully, she'd learned that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing it anyway. It was about falling off horses and getting back on, about losing barns and rebuilding them, about facing down the people who hurt you and saying no more. It was about choosing over and over again to keep fighting for the life you wanted instead of accepting the life you were given. The ranch prospered. They had children eventually. 2 daughters who grew up knowing how to ride and shoot and think for themselves, who learned from their mother that being tough didn't mean being hard, and being kind didn't mean being weak. Black Hollow grew from a struggling frontier settlement into a real town. The railroad came through. More families arrived. The Wild West slowly became less wild. But Evelyn never forgot what it had taken to survive those early years. Never forgot the woman she'd been when she arrived. Desperate and bruised and running from everything. And she never forgot the lesson that those hard years had taught her. That the strongest thing you can do is choose yourself. Choose your own path, your own life. Your own happiness, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because in the end, the only person who has to live with your choices is you. So you might as well make them count. Evelyn Hayes lived a long life, long enough to see her daughters married, her grandchildren born, her ranch become one of the most successful in Wyoming. Long enough to see women get the vote and fight in wars and run businesses. Long enough to watch the world change in ways she never could have imagined. But through it all, she never forgot that cold February morning when she stepped off a wagon into Black Hollow with nothing but fear and determination. Never forgot the man who'd promised she wouldn't have to be afraid in his house, and then kept that promise every single day. Never forgot the feeling of finally being free. And when people asked her, as they often did, what the secret was to surviving the frontier, to building a life from nothing, to overcoming the kind of obstacles that broke most people, she always gave the same answer. The secret is that there is no secret. You just decide what you want your life to look like, and then you fight like hell to make it happen. You fall down and you get back up. You fail and you try again. You get scared and you do it anyway. She'd pause, smile that knowing smile of someone who'd lived through things most people couldn't imagine. And most importantly, you find people worth fighting beside. Because nobody survives alone. Not really. We all need someone to hold the rope when the storm hits. Rowan died first, the way men in that era often did, worn out from hard work and harder living. But he went peacefully, in the house he'd built, surrounded by the family he'd created. Evelyn lived another 5 years after that. And if those years were quieter, lonelier, they were also filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the life she'd lived, the choices she'd made, the person she'd become. She died in her sleep one winter night, the kind of easy death frontier women rarely got. And when they buried her next to Rowan on a hill overlooking the ranch, her daughters found something tucked into her journal, a newspaper clipping, faded and yellowed with age. The advertisement that had started everything, rancher seeking wife, must be strong, honest, and unafraid of hard work. Beneath it, in Evelyn's handwriting, a single sentence. I wasn't any of those things when I answered this, but I became them. That's the point. And maybe that was the real story all along, not about a woman who was saved by a man or a marriage or moving west, but about a woman who saved herself by making one impossible choice, and then another, until the impossible became her life. Until the scared girl from Philadelphia became the woman who could face down blizzards and bullies and her own worst fears. Until running away became the bravest thing she ever did. Because sometimes the only way to find yourself is to lose everything you thought you were supposed to be. And sometimes the life you build from nothing ends up being worth more than anything you left behind.